I was watching the Jeffrey Epstein documentary on Netflix last night and I'm spooked. Literally had a mini panic attack with all these memories flooding in. As I'm lying in bed watching, a girl's face flashes across the screen and I recognize one of his victims as one of my really good childhood friends. I don't know if it belongs here, but here's my story. I've lived in South Florida almost all of my life with my crazy controlling parents that wouldn't let me do anything as a kid. No phone calls to friends, no extracurricular activities unless they were academic, couldn't have friends over, and you can forget about me going over to anyone's house. Plus my dad worked at my school during my elementary school years, so I had to be on my best behavior. So when I went to my middle school, I was so freaking pumped. Finally, some type of freedom. My personality started to shine and making friends came easy to me. Fast forward to a year in and I had become really good friends with these two girls. We can call them Heather and Sharon. They were both pretty popular and friendly, but what fascinated me most was that Heather was the only girl in middle school that I knew that was able to sleep over a boy's house. It was something so foreign to me since my parents told me I couldn't even go on a date with a boy until after I graduated high school or college. They didn't specify, so I automatically thought she was the coolest chick I'd ever met. Throughout our friendship, we were known as the tripod. We had all the same classes and lunch periods, so we all got pretty close. Over time, Heather would always ask me to hang out with her and Sharon either after school or on the weekends, but with my parents, there was no way in heck. I did attempt multiple times to ask for permission with no success each time. Not even a maybe. I was so bummed because I always felt left out after having Heather and Sharon hanging out with me, something I would eventually become grateful for. One day, while sitting out in the courtyard for lunch, Heather pulled me aside and asked what I thought about skipping school for one day. I instantly freaked out and thought about that automated message the school calls home with to let you, or I should say the parents, know that you weren't at school. If my parents ever got that, my ass would be toast, so I shut the idea down right away and kind of laughed it off because there would be no way to pull it off. But she literally would not stop asking, so eventually she convinced me and we were ready to start the planning. It took us about a week every day during lunch, trying to figure out how to pull this off. The thrill of it had me so excited as I've never done anything like this. The plan was to have my mom drop me off at school as usual and have the girls there waiting for me. And we would simply just walk off to the gas station, and that's near the school, and have one of Heather's friends pick us up. Not sure how I planned on dodging the school call, but whatever. Oh, and I forgot to add, Heather made it a point several times to remind me that I need to wear something that would give me an innocent look. I blew this off because I was already 13 years old. I looked innocent enough. The plan goes smoothly and we were walking to the gas station, but as we're walking, Heather's cell phone is blowing up. Like constant phone calls and texts coming through. Each one she answered. Just meet us at the gas station like we usually do. At this point, I'm confused because I thought it was supposed to be the tripod hanging out for the day. As we get closer to the gas station, I see a group of like 7 other girls standing there, and they're around the same age range, 12 to 14. Some girls I've even seen around school, others I didn't recognize, but they all perk up when they see Heather walk up. All of a sudden, Heather yells, "Who's ready to make some money?" And almost all the girls raise their hands and start cheering. I grabbed Sharon and asked her what she was talking about, and the look that Sharon gave me is one I'll never forget. It was like she was saying, "Get out now while you can." It just made me very uncomfortable, and she ended up never saying anything. It was weird. A big group of young girls who should be in school, just hanging out at a gas station. As we're standing there, 2 black Lincoln Town cars pull up and make a sudden stop right in front of us. Heather starts numbering the girls and tells the first group to get in the first car, and as they do, the car speeds away. The other one slowly rolls the window down, and I see this older man with sunglasses on just sitting there smiling. He asked if we're ready to go to the mansion, which excites the 2 other girls standing behind me. He opens the door and they jump in, followed by Sharon. Heather is standing next to me and nudges me to go on, but as she does, I start going off on her, asking her what the heck's going on, where are we going, who is this man, and why didn't she mention this in any of her plans. She's looking almost annoyed at me and says, "Out of all the girls I bring, you are the only one that's giving me a problem. I thought you would want to get out and have some fun, and with your body you can make a killing." At the time I was so naive I didn't know exactly what she meant by the tone of her voice and how pressured she was making me feel. I ended up backing out and ran back to school. As embarrassed as I felt for bailing out my friends, I feared my mom and her belt a lot more. Plus, going off in a car with someone I've never met screams stranger danger. But I'm so grateful that my parents put that fear in me, or else I don't know if I would have made that smart decision. After that, I barely hung out with Heather again, and she tried a few more times, but I just got bad vibes from her and cut her off. But I always saw her randomly walk out of school towards the gas station. Always with a group of girls. Sharon, on the other hand, started to spiral into depression slowly. She would only hang out with Heather and would cling to her like a lost puppy. I noticed that she would miss school more frequently until one day she just stopped coming altogether. Years later, I found out that she ended up dying, and recently, after watching the documentary, I'm convinced that she was one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, and Heather was one of the recruiters. I should have mentioned this happened in 2004 in West Palm Beach. I reached out to the only childhood friend I stay in contact with, and she confirmed that it was in fact my friend whom we went to middle school with in that documentary. Since this morning, I've contacted a friend who's in law enforcement to see if I could speak with someone about what I know. Even the little information I have could help out in some way. As for Sharon, I never met anyone in her family or had any contact information, as I was on major lockdown back then and this was a long time ago. Still trying to track them down to see if they knew about any of this. So, for some much needed context, I'm a nudist. Most of us nudists travel to resorts or campgrounds in our area where nudity is allowed because they are private property. These campgrounds are often near the woods or on the outskirts of their respective towns, as nudism isn't exactly an accepted lifestyle. This encounter took place at a campground last July. I won't mention the place for privacy reason, but just know it sits on 5 acres of rural land surrounded by hundreds of acres of dense forest and hills. I planned on staying at this campground for 3 nights. It was an IPW, so besides those who live on the campgrounds, there weren't many people out and about. But whatever, I liked the seclusion. After checking in and dropping my bag at the cabin, I went over to the pool to swim. After swimming a few laps and enjoying the sunshine, I noticed something. At the top of one of the hills overlooking the campground stood a man looking right at me. Normally, that wouldn't mean much, but he was clothed. I should probably mention now that this campground isn't a standard nudist campground. About 90% of nudist campgrounds are clothing optional, meaning you are allowed to wear clothes if you choose, apart from some exceptions, like in the pool or shower areas. But this campground was nude only, meaning unless in the case of extreme weather or women when menstruating, all clothing was prohibited. And I know this place is a strict enforcer of that, so a clothed person was a bit out of the ordinary. First, I thought the man was possibly a worker, being that they would usually wear something while doing maintenance to protect themselves. But this guy was wearing blue jeans and a black hoodie with the hood up. It felt off, especially being that it was 85 degrees outside. He stood there frozen like a statue with his hands in his hoodie pocket. The campground had nature trails that were accessible to the public, not being that it was so far from town that all the locals knew of the place. Having unsuspected visitors like this was virtually non-existent. Even though I was creeped out by this guy, I knew I needed to tell people in the office about him to shoo him away. So I got up, dried myself off, and made my way to the office. I told the 2 older ladies working at the office about what I saw. Being that they knew me because I came here often, they took my claim seriously. I brought them to where I saw him by the pool. But yep, you guessed it, he was gone. I was gone for about 2 minutes, giving him plenty of time to walk away, and being that it was so early in the morning, I doubt anyone else saw him. We went up to the top of the hill to see if we could spot him, but no luck. I figured that because he saw me go to the office and because I just straight up spotted him, that I probably scared him off. He was a creep, yes, but I rationalized the whole thing by thinking he was probably just some local who ventured too far down the trail, so I went on about my day. As the day went on, people came and went as any normal campground would, and I had almost completely forgotten about the encounter. That was until night fell. This campground offered cabins for rent or guests, and lucky me, I had the cabin closest to the trail. It was very cozy and small, no more than 2 to 3 parking spaces of room, and had paper-thin wood as the walls, allowing me to hear even the faintest of sounds from outside. My cabin was away from pretty much anyone. My nearest neighbor was a local who we will call Sam, who lived in his trailer about 150 feet away from my cabin. I was lying on the bed reading a book when I could hear faint crunching of twigs and grass outside from the cabin, almost like footsteps. At first I thought it was Sam because he would usually smoke around this time, but something about the frequency of the footsteps made them suspicious. as if they were trying to be as discreet as possible. I got up from my bed and slowly peered through the blinds. It took me a while to see, but I could just make out a figure slowly walking towards Sam's trailer. My heart sank. Sam was a pale white man, and I'd never seen him clothed before, so the fact that I couldn't make out his pale skin through the darkness made me come to terms with who it was. It was the man from the hill. Same black hoodie, and after confirming, the same blue jeans. Whoever this was, he must have picked Sam's trailer for whatever sick plan he had, being that his trailer was the closest to the trail. Then everything hit me at once. Sam has 2 young daughters in that trailer. They lived there during the summer. Sam was the only one with kids that actually lived in the campground. This guy somehow knew that and had plans to do who knows what. Who knows how long he's been secretly watching them. I saw them on that hill and he was only 100 feet from the trailer, probably doing one last dry run before his plan. I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and called Sam. Calling the police would have been pointless, seeing how far we were from the closest station. The phone rang and rang and rang and he wasn't picking up. I called again and again, occasionally peeking out the blinds again to see the man walking around the trailer. Around the 5th time, I saw the man stand on a box and peer into a window. I decided that I needed to do something drastic. I was going to go out there and handle this myself. I didn't have time to get my clothes from my bag, so I just threw on my hiking boots, and as soon as I opened the cabin door, I heard a high-pitched scream. I snapped my head in the direction of the trailer and I saw all the lights flick on, revealing the man climbing out of the window from the trailer and starting to run down the trail. Without even thinking, I chased him. I could hear Sam yell, "What happened?" as one of his daughters explains the situation. Sam then takes off as well, seeing me in pursuit. I could just barely make out the man's blue jeans, but he was much faster than Sam and I. The weirdo got away. I stopped to catch my breath, with Sam catching up to me, doing the same. Told him what I saw and we made our way back to the trailer to regroup. By then, a few other residents were out of their trailers, with his daughters being told what happened. A few of the other men went into the trail to see if they could find anything while I called the police. It took 30 minutes for them to show up, and we told them what happened, and soon some officers also went into the woods. We never found out who that man was, and since then, Sam and his daughter sold their trailer and moved out just weeks later. I haven't been back to that campground since, and from what I hear, the residents have moved on from all of this. They put up a fence line throughout the whole property, as well as a volunteer security guard who patrols the premises. So, a few years ago, I used to work in this petrol station as part of a supermarket. It was on Christmas Eve, just working I'd say a not so bad late shift. With about an hour and a half left of my shift, this drunk guy enters to buy some food. I served him, and I'll admit, since it was Christmas Eve, I thought I looked the part as I was wearing a full face of makeup, mainly to save me time after my shift as I was going out after. The drunk guy just stared at me in silence after I rang him up, and I'm just staring back at him and I say, "You're all good now. You okay there?" And he says with this speech all slurred, "Wow, you're beautiful. Like, you've got really nice eyes." I just responded with, thanks." Then he says, "Are you single? Are you? Please tell me." I have a fiance named Mark. Now, I've had a few of these encounters before, and what I've learned is that I tell most of these people I have a boyfriend, either in honesty or just in defense. Sometimes they don't give up and carry on badly flirting, because when I told him I'm not single, he quickly responded, "I bet your boyfriend doesn't even realize how beautiful you are. I can treat you better than him." My colleague Matthew suddenly sensed that I was starting to get uncomfortable, but when I looked at him and I said, "Let me handle this," I found my new way of shutting him down, which had worked for me for 9 times out of 10 in situations like these. But this time it didn't, so I said, "Sir, my wife always notices my good looks." Yes, I tell them in other words I'm a lesbian. The guy starts in silent defeat while he is, which I'm guessing is, soothing that burn. I carried on with filling a shelf. I had to bend over to pick up an empty box off the floor, and just as I did that, the guy came up behind me, and I shit you not, he slaps my ass and shouts, "I bet I can convert ya." Hearing that enraged me. Without a thought, I turned around and threw my fist into his face. I basically punched him, but it hit his cheek. And at that moment, my colleague, Matt, hopped over from behind the counter, grabbed the man who I sucker punched, and threw him out of the shop, screaming, "You'll get worse from me if you ever come back here." I told my boss what happened, and thankfully I didn't get in trouble for it, as she agreed he kinda deserved it. A year later, same sort of shift, and I was working with a young girl who was new to the job. She served customers while I was cracking on filling the shelves, trying to make room in the back before a delivery. Come out of the stock room only to notice that the same guy has returned, and of course he is drunk again. I forgot to mention this guy was probably old enough to be my dad. I stayed hidden in the back hoping my colleague would serve him and hoping he would just leave, but I noticed he kept saying to my colleague, "Hi beautiful, how are you?" I thought he was really over the top with the word beautiful, but of course he didn't leave. I noticed he was trying to reach over the desk trying to touch her. All my colleague was pressed with her back against the wall, trying to keep her distance but trying to maintain that customer service character. I could clearly see she was terrified, so I had to rescue her. I burst out of the back and get behind the desk and stand in front of her, pointing her to go into the staff's kitchen to get away from him. Then I turned to the man and told him, "Listen mate, you need to leave now." The guy laughs and says, "I'm not doing any harm, babe. I was only chatting with her." I had to cut him off and, reaching over the desk to try and touch her. "That is not okay," I said. "The girl is just trying to do her job, and we are all paid to fill shelves and be nice to people. Get that through your head. Just because a 20-something-year-old cashier is smiling and being nice to you doesn't automatically mean she wants you." Then he started to get cocky. "Ah, I remember you. You're that dyke with the nice arse." This guy was super lucky there was a counter between us, and to add to that, he was also lucky there was nothing at hand to throw at him too. I held out my fist and responded, "Yeah, the dyke who fed you this fist. Unless you want to turn the other cheek, I suggest you screw off and consider yourself banned." He left the store with his tail between his legs. The funny part after this was there was a customer behind him, and that customer's jaw dropped after overhearing the whole thing. But he had the time to hear the whole story and also explained to my colleague that I basically told the creep I was a lesbian in hopes he'd back off, but he didn't, so I punched him in the face. This happened about 4 years ago. I had just started working at a university hospital in the US as a nursing care tech. At the time, I was planning on going to nursing school. I've since changed my major and graduated, and though working in a hospital would be a great starting place for the experience, and it would give me a better chance at getting into nursing school at that university. Anyways, I was always a very outgoing and friendly person. I still am, and I am not a stranger to anyone. I had no issues making new friends at my job. I worked the day shift, 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m., 3 days a week. Our shifts always overlapped with the night shift in order to give a full report to them about the patients they would be caring for that evening. Sometimes I would have to give a report to a night shift employee by the name of Mark. Mark was always funny and outgoing, and we seemed to hit it off pretty well. I was dating somebody new at the time, and Mark was married, but I always felt like he was a cool friend to hang out with. We had previously discussed stories of going out to bars. One night, when I was getting off work, I had mentioned I was planning on going out to a bar the next night with a group of friends and invited him along. He was more than happy to join us. The entire time we were out there, we had a great time and he hit it off with everyone there, despite not knowing anyone in my friends group. He never blatantly hit on me or gave any hint of indication that he was attracted to me. Just saw him as a friend, and it had always felt that way, and I felt the feeling was mutual. I arrived home around 2 a.m. and woke up maybe around 9 or 10 a.m. I checked my phone to find an unreasonable number of text messages from an unknown number. This was several years ago, and I no longer have the messages, but it was something along the lines of this. "I know you went out with my husband last night. I know you have a boyfriend, but you must be attracted to my husband. Otherwise, why else would you invite him out to a bar without my presence and without your boyfriend? I know my husband is attractive, and I don't always appreciate him going out with other women. Blah, 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 blah." I don't remember the next 4 paragraphs she sent me, but the one that stuck out was when she asked, "So, are you a team player?" with a smiley face. I kindly informed her that I do have a trusting boyfriend who did not mind if I went out with male friends, and I was in no way attracted to her husband. He was not attractive whatsoever to me, but I didn't outright say that. I also told her that while I understand and respect that they have an open relationship, I am not interested in experimenting with other couples, and I prefer my relationship to be monogamous. She was completely understanding and even offered to meet up for drinks with her husband and her in the future. Now, I really don't care if my new friend is a swinger or not. Not my personal lifestyle, but hey, I don't judge. I was willing to forget the whole ordeal and look past it. Mark and I made plans to go on a double date with my boyfriend and his wife, Helen, at a dance club. All was well, and we all had a lot of fun bar hopping and dancing. She seemed cool enough, and I learned that she was a school teacher in the neighboring town. By the end of the evening, we all have our friendly goodbyes and retreated home. Again the next morning, I woke up to a whole new set of a million text messages sent from his wife. This time not so friendly. She was upset and went off on me, claiming that I was a homewrecker and that I had destroyed their marriage. She claimed that I had grabbed his hand on the way to the dance floor and put his hand on my ass, which never happened. Then claimed I grabbed his ass, which never happened also. Then changed her story a third time and claimed I grabbed his ass, which again never happened either. I kindly explained to her that none of those events ever occurred. She said I obviously didn't remember any of it because I was too drunk to remember, and said my boyfriend had to carry me out of the bar. Now, I only had 2 drinks over the 3 hours we were out. I was never drunk or blackout, not even close, as she had put it, and I left the bar walking on my own with my boyfriend at the time, and had myself a good night's sleep. Either way, she wasn't having my side of the story. I decided to let it go and stop trying to convince her otherwise, and I was planning on having a talk with Mark regarding the misconstrued issue. The next day, she posted on Facebook about how her marriage was wrecked because of me. She used my name in her Facebook status and said she was going to show up at my house and settle it. She also said she never slept and hadn't slept in days, and it was all my fault, and she placed the blame for her failing marriage on me. The words she used describing how she was going to settle it weren't so kind or mature. She had no idea where I lived, so I wasn't too worried about it. She told everyone and left me a wonderful voicemail about how she planned on pressing charges against me for molesting her husband that night. A few hours later, she left me another voicemail sobbing and apologizing to me, telling me how horrible Mark was and how he's a jerk and really mean to her, and told me she was sorry he ever got in the way of our friendship, and she would never allow him to interfere with our friendship again. I hardly knew her, and I had only met her once in person. I promptly deleted and blocked her on Facebook, and my boyfriend did as well. Never returned her calls, nor did I worry about having charges pressed, because that never happened, and her husband had agreed with me prior. Although I had stopped responding and ceased contact with her, the phone calls started. She would call me at all hours of the day, anytime from 6 a.m. to midnight, but I never answered. Anytime she was awake, I had no issues leaving my phone on silent, so I just ignored them, thinking she would give up eventually. She lightened up after a few days. The next time I was at work, I decided to pull him aside into the storage room to have a talk with him privately because I didn't want coworkers to hear or get involved. I didn't think it was a big issue. I told him the issue I was having with his wife, and he apologized about it and told me he would have a talk with her, told me he would get her to stop. Great. Until he dropped this bombshell that would make all of this make a tad more sense, but still doesn't excuse her behavior. Nearing the end of the conversation, he bluntly told me, "Look, I'm sorry about everything that has happened with her, but I have to be honest with you. I want to bang you, and I told my wife I wanted to. She had an affair a few years ago, and recently, that's how I've been feeling. She wasn't okay with it at first, but she said if it was a threesome, she'd be willing to settle for that. Initially, she was alright with it, but as time passed since I told her that, she got upset about it. Sorry she's been so crazy." I was a little stunned, but it made everything come together for a bit about why she's been so upset. I told him I wasn't interested in him, and I also told him I didn't want to go out with him alone anymore, and I didn't want any more double dates, and that was that. Fast forward a week or so, and everything had calmed down. I thought it was over, and I was beginning to forget the whole ordeal. One night I was in bed, about to go to sleep, until I got a text message from a number I don't know. All it says is, "What's up?" I asked who it was, and whoever it was completely avoided the question. "I miss you." "Where are you living now? Can I come by?" "Hey girl, want to hang out tonight? We haven't seen each other in forever and it's been too long. Let me come over tonight and let's have a drink and catch up. I'm on Winchester Road coming into town and I heard you live around here. Where are you? I can stop on my way into town." "Hey girl, I miss you and I love you. When are we going to see each other?" I stopped answering because he or she would never tell me who they were. The texting was constant and the calls were even worse. The calls would come in at 2 a.m. every 10 to 15 minutes or so, and they would not stop until about 8 a.m. sometimes. This went on for 3 or 4 days. Around this same time, my boyfriend got a friend request from somebody with no mutual friends on Facebook, and she had messaged him privately over Facebook along with this request. She explained she was a new nursing student coming to the university we went to, and she was on Facebook to make new friends before she moved here from Indiana and was researching students at our university in order to make friends before she arrived. He thought it was innocent enough. My boyfriend was Middle Eastern and did not have a common first or last name whatsoever. He also had nothing to do with the College of Nursing at the university. He added her and they had casual conversations over Facebook about similar interests and hobbies, sports, and fun places to go around our town. All was fine and well until she started asking him inappropriate questions like, "What's your girlfriend like? Do you think I'm pretty? I'm prettier than her." I don't remember what else she sent him, but they eventually turned into sexual advances. My boyfriend wasn't cool with it at all and considered blocking her and let me read it because he wasn't sure what to do. I read through all of the messages and the first thing out my mouth was, "That's Helen." He didn't believe me at first, but the way she described herself and her interests here was exactly like her. Once I explained all of that to him, he was convinced. She had made a fake profile with fake friends, which she had made in order for it to look real, and used Facebook pictures of one of her relatives. He confronted her about it and she completely lost it. Started cursing at him, threatening him, telling him how she has no idea who it is he is talking about, and went on a long rant about how her husband beats her and she's pregnant, I guess for sympathy. Helen was never pregnant and Mark never beat her, as far as I could tell at least. He told her he was sorry that she was in that position and he eventually just gave up and blocked her. Somehow she managed to get his Gmail and university email, and once she found that, the email started. Keep in mind, I was getting constant phone calls at the same time throughout the nights when this was happening. I mean, I was getting something like 200 plus missed calls when I woke up the next morning. Initially, the emails were threatening, then later moved to emails looking for sympathy for a made-up pregnancy and her abusive husband and all the horrible things he did to her. Then finally moved on to a confession about how she was really Helen and she was sorry. He never responded to any of them. Because he never sent a response to her apology email, along came once again another angry, threatening email. He didn't respond to that one either. At this point, I had had enough, and I was just worn out on the entire thing. It became exhausting and I was so tired of dealing with it. A good friend of mine is an officer in our city, and I called him and told him everything what was happening and how bad it was escalating. I showed him all the emails, texts, messages, and phone calls. The first thing he did was call the number of the person who had been harassing me to have them stop. She had admitted it was her, Helen, and agreed to stop contact with me, but told my friend, Officer Walton, that she will be pressing charges against me for molestation. He explained to her that it is not possible and no such thing as pressing charges for molestation for grabbing a grown man's ass. She was displeased, but I think having an officer call her to cease contact with me and my boyfriend was enough to make her stop. I haven't heard from her since. Months went by and everything finally went back to normal. I had transferred to a different department within the hospital, so I would not have to work with Mark anymore. Never told anyone at work about it, and I do not wish to have any more contact with him. But I was still on the same floor despite being on a different unit. Passed through his hall one night leaving work. I had to in order to go home. He was off work that night, but I stopped in the nurse's station to say hi and bye to some of the nurses I used to work with. There was a large note hanging in the nurse's station with the extension to security. I laughed about it and asked what in the world could have happened to need their extension in such large bold letters. Nadia told me that apparently Mark had left his wife while she was at work. He packed up all of his belongings and moved to an apartment in town without any notice to her, and he was planning on divorcing her. This did not settle well with Helen. For a few days, she came up to the unit he was working on, looking for him in order to confront him about it. She only showed up on his off days for a few days until she finally found him. She never told any of the staff who she was. She just kept coming around asking about him. They would just tell her he was off work and she would finally leave. After 9 or 10 p.m., all visitors have to check in with security with a state-issued ID in order to enter the hospital. Helen had found an old pair of scrubs that belonged to Mark, and when she came up to the entrance, she told security that she had left her badge at home and she wasn't able to access the building because of it. Surprisingly, they just let her in. She went up to the unit he was working at and she began screaming, crying, and begging him to come home. One of the nurses called security because she was making a huge scene. When security arrived to escort her out, she threatened a whole bunch of crazy shit if he didn't come home. She ended up being admitted to the mental facility a few miles down the road. The staff had left a note up in case she showed up looking for him again. Several months later, he divorced her, graduated from nursing school, and moved back to Indiana once he found a nursing job from his hometown. I never heard from Mark or Helen again. Fast forward a year, I went out with my friend Officer Walton to just hang out and catch up. as we hadn't seen each other in a while. He mentions out of the blue, "You will never ever guess who left me a voicemail just a few days ago." Helen. I was dumbfounded. What the hell did she want? She still had her number for over a year. He'd only called her once, but I guess she kept it over a year and a half. He let me listen to the voicemail. She told him she was trying to divorce Mark because he was abusive and she needed to serve him a restraining order. She told him I was helping her out with it. Heck no, I was not. She said the courts had told her that she needed to find an officer on her own in order to do so. Her friend Officer Walton never called her back. He laughed and said that it was highly unlikely she had a restraining order because one is already in place. The county finds their own employees to take care of the matter. They do not leave it to victims to ask around and find an officer to take care of it for them. Regardless, he never called her back and we never heard from her again. So Helen, for the love of humanity, let's not meet. I don't want to deal with your shit again. So, my sister called my family the other day and told my parents about a strange man that she and her friend came across. They have been there for about a week and were out walking in the redwoods when a man appeared out of practically nowhere and startled them. My sister claimed that he looked completely normal and was even kind of handsome, in her opinion, but he gave off a creepy vibe pretty quick. He apparently began asking them weird questions like who they were and what they were doing out in his woods. After they explained that they were just out exploring, he quickly got annoyed and said that they were liars. My sister and her friend began to walk away quickly as they assumed he was probably on drugs, but he walked after them and said more weird stuff. She said that he even asked them to kiss each other because he knew they were lesbian lovers. They are not, by the way. My sister's friend apparently turned around and screamed at him to leave them alone. My sister said this is where he got scary as hell. She said he gave my sister and her friend the most evil and hateful look she's ever seen in her life, and he said this in response. "You two are such disrespectful bitches. I've killed a few of you over the last few years, and I'd love to add you both to my count." My sister and her friend didn't even hesitate, and both booked it right after he said that. They heard him chasing after them and screaming at them. My sister said that she couldn't make much of what he said, other than he would chop them up and a few other threats. They both made it safely out of the woods, and they didn't see him anywhere. They got in their car and sped back to the town they were staying in. Called the police to file a report and headed to another area and will be heading home soon. I'm scared and mad that some creep did this to them. I was 12 years old when this happened. My family owns a beach house in a famous place that's known for having great surfing coasts and being generally quiet and friendly. This house is near the downtown area and besides the hotel where the story starts. As I said, I was 12. Early developer, according to some, I looked 15 years old, but still a kid who liked to hang out with my cousin Kathy and my friend Marcia who was 13. The usual for us was to go to the arcades, grab a bite to eat, and go to the crafts fair where you could buy earrings and silly stuff. Our outings were what you could imagine. 3 kids going for a walk, talking kid stuff, sharing a Walkman to listen to music. You know how it is. Until one day, we noticed a guy sitting outside the hotel beside my house. The hotel front yard, fenceless, had this bench, and he spent hours sitting there by himself. This guy was in his 30s, perhaps, and one day he took an interest in my group. Then it escalated and he was interested in me. First, the catcalling. "Hey, cute girls. Where are you going, sweetie pies?" That became a constant in our walks, but we agreed to ignore it, thinking that the guy would probably stop, but he didn't. If anything, the catcalling became a graphic description of what he'd do to the busty brunette, if he caught me alone. His words, not mine. At some point, the situation started to worry me, but stupid me, I didn't tell anyone about it. Marcia told me that attention is attention. Just smile, but Kathy did listen to her gut, telling her something was seriously wrong and talked to my mom when I wasn't around. So one day, we were about to go out. My uncle, mom's brother, gave us some bucks to spend and we were thrilled, so we went downtown. When my mom asked, "You guys going to the crafts fair?" We say yes, and she's joining. When she's crossing the door with us, she claims that she forgot something and says, "Go and I'll catch you." This is where Mama Bear comes to the rescue. She was a couple of feet away from us when the guy starts his usual drill. "I'm going to bang you so hard, baby girl," he said. After I turned around, I saw my mom running to the guy and starting to punch him in the gut and the head. then in the face, leaving several marks thanks to the ring she wore. "Call your uncle," she yelled, and we oblige. My uncle, a huge guy with a slightly threatening appearance, took the next beating shift, while my mom followed by me and the girls went back to the front desk, demanding to know who the heck was the guy that made his jollies harassing her daughter. Turns out he worked at the hotel, like a handyman or something. My mom, fearless woman that she is, talked to the owner of the place, basically stating that if he didn't take action against the guy, he'd get a similar beating. Guy was fired in a heartbeat, and the girls and I were walking and enjoying our summer happily ever after. So please, if you have a son or daughter or any young kid in your family and inner circle, please teach them to trust you if anything is bothering them, and believe them. Teach them to trust their gut and seek help from a trustworthy adult. I didn't speak thinking I could handle it. Turns out I couldn't. But fortunately, I had two badass grown-ups who went the extra mile to make sure I and the girls would enjoy the rest of the summer. My name is Corey, C-O-R-I, a usually feminine spelling of a name for a guy. Not that I mind much of the spelling or so on of what my parents gave me. A few years ago, I had just been let go from my first job out of college. It had been pretty good money, but the company went under, so I started applying to every job I could find, as you do. Indeed. Monster, even Craigslist. One Craigslist job in particular was based on the outskirts of the city I lived in, but I was ready to take anything. The job in question was some basic data entry and assistant work. At least that had been what the job listing said. I thought it was on the up and up, however, because this was one of the few Craigslist postings that had a website attached to it. It was a pretty basic website in retrospect, but the company message seemed to make it sound like they were heavily about serving the city and facilitating volunteer work. Within minutes of applying, I got a message inviting me for an interview that same day, though it titled me as Miss Corey. I was going to respond to correct them, but it read that it was an automated response, so there could be no one to read it. I figured I'd just have to correct them once I got there, and again, it didn't seem like a big deal. I'd got this once or twice before. I drove to the location the company website was listed, and it didn't seem too out of the ordinary. It was the second floor of a small building that was sandwiched in between a pawn shop and a phone store. I didn't think too much of it because this was a big city, and even if this was on the outskirts of the city, a job was a job. I looked up to the second floor of the outside and saw somebody looking down at me. I couldn't make out the face, but it was a person. That much I'm sure of. I went inside the building and took the elevator up to the second floor and didn't find a single soul. It looked like a half-finished office floor from what I remember, with some doors opened and some locked shut. But there was simply no one to speak to, no one to inform that I was here. There was one cubicle, but one of the detachable walls had been left in another office room. There was a computer monitor in one room but no desktop attached to it. A half-finished company banner and a bookcase. On closer inspection of the bookcase, all of the books weren't books at all, but a cardboard printing of a bunch of books stacked together. I finally had too much and called the phone number that had been on the website, but I heard no phone ringing from where I stood. More so, the phone I called seemed to cut my call after a ring and a half, sending me straight to voicemail. Sufficiently creeped out by now, or wondering if I had stumbled on something I shouldn't have, I took the elevator down. As the elevator's door closed, I heard someone muttering angrily. I thought that was a girl's name. I didn't want to stay to find out who said it. Instead, I walked right back to my car and drove back home, not even daring to look back up at the window of the floor I was sure I had been scheduled for. That very evening, out of morbid curiosity, I checked Craigslist. The posting was gone. I looked for the website. It had been disabled. To this day, I still wonder what or who did I stumble upon. My greatest regret is not calling the police about this. This happened in the year 2000. I was 21, living with my best friends in a 2-bedroom apartment in a pretty rundown area. Fortunately, there was no crime, as it was all two broke kids just getting started could afford. I spent my days juggling classes at the local community college and working retail. I was single at the time and would often spend my time online all night in chat rooms and Usenet. I had met this girl in a local area chat room, but we had been hitting it off, or so it seemed. I'd emailed her and we'd chat on ICQ. She had sent me a few pictures and I was really into her. Pretty much my type. Her name was Beth, and she had told me Beth by Kiss was her favorite song. This one rainy night in February, we were talking and she had asked me to come over. She lived a few towns over, maybe an hour away. Like I said earlier, we were hitting it off, and honestly, I found myself liking Beth a lot, so I jumped at the chance to actually meet her in person. We made plans for me to pick her up and go to Waffle House. Showered and got dressed. Nothing too fancy. One of those long sleeve shirts with the stripe across the chest. Jeans and a hoodie. I didn't want to overdo it, but still looked decent. By the time I left, it was almost 11 and my roommate was asleep in his room. I headed out excited and nervous. In hindsight, I should have stayed home. It took a lot longer to get there than I thought it would. Probably thanks to the rain, but sure enough, her directions took me to the right place. A double-wide trailer in a rural area trailer park. I walked up the stairs of the front porch and knocked on the door. I've always been pretty shy when talking to girls I liked, and I was still nervous when she opened the door. The door opened just a little bit, and a little voice told me to come in. I walked in, apologizing for taking so long, and a little bit of a nervous daze. She said it was okay and to have a seat. I sat down, and then for the first time, I looked up at her. That was not Beth. This was a much older woman, maybe mid-40s, wearing only a bathrobe, sitting down across from me. I don't want to body shame, but I need to point out that she was huge. I'm a big guy as well, over 6 foot with a big Hoss-type body, but she was much bigger than me. I glanced around trying to figure out what was going on. I saw pictures of the Beth I knew on the wall, same pictures I've seen. Hey, who's that guy in the pictures with this older woman? I looked back at her and instantly noticed that she was staring at the clock nervously. I asked what was going on, and she started mumbling nervously. Actually, imagine a child telling you what they have done when in trouble. That's how she was talking, like a child caught red-handed. I pieced together that she used the other pictures of a girl around my age. I'm assuming the girl was a niece or something. In her mumbling, said it was later than she realized and he'd be home soon. My mind instantly raced to a friend telling me his uncle caught his wife using pictures of their daughter to lure younger guys over for anonymous sex. I quickly realized the guy in the pictures was her husband, and I was in the same situation. I fully respect others' relationships and was instantly ready to go. No longer nervous, I told her I was not going to mess around with a married woman. I told her to no longer contact me and that I was leaving. I was upset. Not only had I been lied to, but I had been cheated on before, and I knew exactly what that felt like and refused to have part in doing that to another person. As I walked out the door onto the porch, she yelled to wait. I turned around instinctively to see her coming towards me. She grabbed me, trying to kiss me, and I pushed her away, telling her to stop. Her face turned into a mask of pure insanity. She rushed towards me again, trying again. I tried to hold her back, but in a second she tackled me, knocking me over with her falling on top of me, grabbing me and grabbing at my genitals, kissing me and crying. She kept screaming for me to bang her. I was trying to push her off, but the fall had knocked the wind out of me. Not to mention, like I said, she was huge. I kept wrestling with her, trying my best, and somehow worked my legs in between us. I pushed them as hard as I could, knocking her off me. She stumbled up and fell over on her porch furniture. Adrenaline took over, and I ran as fast as I could down the stairs to my car. As I was sliding into my seat, I saw her picking herself up at the bottom of the stairs. She must have fallen down trying to get me still. I backed down the driveway, and as I looked before driving away, she was coming down it. Her bathrobe hanging half off her, and her naked body exposed and covered with scratches and dirty from the falls. I drove off as fast as my Ford Escort would take me. I don't know how I didn't get into a wreck from constantly looking in the rearview mirror, hoping she wasn't following me. I found my way back to the main road and before long, realized I had gone the wrong way. I pulled into the first gas station, intending to turn around. I noticed nobody was following me and the gas station was well lit and had a few cars. I felt safe and parked. Trying to get myself together after that insane scuffle. I still can't believe how scared I was. If you had seen that phase and been through that tackle, you would understand. I collected myself and got out of the car to use the bathroom and make sure I wasn't hurt. The adrenaline was wearing off and random pain started creeping in. It was then that I noticed the gas station was uphill overlooking that trailer park. I could see her standing at the bottom of the driveway. It looked like she was holding her head crying. At first, I felt bad for her. I'm a nice person to a fault. I've often let myself get sucked into bad situations by feeling bad for a person I shouldn't have. Saw this crazy person crying and felt bad somehow. Then I remembered her crazy shit and the pain creeping in, making me wonder if she seriously hurt me. So I used the bathroom and left. As I was getting back in my car, I looked back one more time. I saw a car in the driveway and a man was yelling in the front yard. I guess he got home while I was peeing. Can't imagine what it would be like coming home to your wife standing naked in the driveway crying. Judging by her mumbling before the insanity, I figured she wasn't a good liar. I got home and the next day told my roommate what happened. I didn't want to at first. I felt ashamed for some reason. Though, like I said, he was my best friend. He knew when something was wrong, not to mention I was limping around. My entire body was killing me. He figured she was unhappy in her marriage and maybe her screwing around made her a little crazy. Or maybe she was already crazy and the situation set her off. Maybe on drugs. I don't know. Cut off all contact and it's been almost 20 years since this night. Never heard from or seen Beth again. I'm 41 and happily married. My best friend is still my best friend, even though he no longer lives in the state. We never really talk about it. Outside of this, I've only talked about it to a therapist I visited during a particularly hard time in my life. My wife doesn't know, and I still feel pretty ashamed about it. The therapist told me it was probably from a little PTSD type thing, not to mention guilt from perceived gender roles. Maybe. About 3 years ago, my group of friends decided to go on a holiday weekend trip to the hometown of one of the girls, as her family had a small villa not far away from the urban center. We arrived Friday afternoon and decided the first thing we should do was party at the disco. We prepared and were ready to go just before 8 p.m. That's when Gigi, our hostess, gave us a warning. Girls and guys, a little something before we go. We are going to the biggest bar in town, which is sometimes frequented by narco dudes. Not to scare you, they don't do anything if you don't bother them, but be careful with who you dance with, especially you Ken, our fuckboy friend. Don't go chasing some hitman's girlfriend. Now, who is ready to party? See, Gigi's hometown, which you could say is more of a very little city than a town, is basically the capital of our country's whole eastern region. The area is mostly plains, cattle and such. Picture the American Wild West and is also home to a lot of drug trafficking routes, plantations and hideouts because the government has little to no strength in the faraway areas. Drug lord presence is strong, and while they normally keep to themselves, it's not uncommon for them or their henchmen to be on the town doing their daily activities. Many are not even publicly known as criminals, so no bigger deal there, but for those who are, people and police just look to the other side in fear of what they could do to snitches. I tell you all of this so that you understand that while Gigi tried to make her warning more user-friendly, she was totally serious about it. Back to the story. We were in the disco having some good times when we lost the protagonist of this tale, Rosa, who by the way gave me permission to post this. Rosa is, well, she is kind of a hoe. Nothing wrong with it, and I love her to death, but man, this girl's hormones have gotten her in some spiky situations. The night goes on and Rosa is nowhere to be found, and when it was time to go home, we could not see her. We blasted her phone until she finally sent a message. Girls, I'm in this amazingly private after party. Don't worry. I will be in the house by tomorrow. Gigi's face says it all. The first thing I said. The first and only. We will be lucky if we see her in a week. Why is she so dumb? As Gigi predicted, we wouldn't see Rosa for the rest of the weekend, meaning Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning. We were worried, but Gigi told us that we should not call the authorities. We needed to wait a little bit more. Obviously, our little vacation was ruined by all of this because we were constantly preoccupied. You can imagine our sight of relief when Rosa finally contacted us, just before we returned to our city. She called to say she was waiting downtown. I'm going to skip our reunion for a little while so I can jump to what Rosa told us happening in her absence. In the disco, she met a handsome guy that called himself Diego. He was tall with big muscles and a great dancer, who, after an hour of dancing and kissing, offered to take her to a private party in a villa with some of his friends. I don't know if she was very drunk or smitten, but she said yes. She went outside with him, where they met a group of 14 girls. Apparently, they were all gorgeous according to her description, and a bunch of guys. Some like Diego, and others just plain scary that looked like badly disguised soldiers. Diego made a call, and, in no time, 5 SUVs came and picked them all up. After a 40-minute ride, she found herself in what she described as a literal mansion in the middle of nowhere. They were welcomed by a good-looking woman that could be in her late 40s who guided them inside. Rose assessed that in the house were other girls and a few guys, but it was obvious that the main guests were 7 older men who everybody obeyed. They were drinking, sniffing cocaine, and making out with the ladies and even some of the guys, including Diego, much to Rosa's grief, and invited the recently arrived to join them. My friend's memory becomes blurry after this first impression, but in summary, she had 2 full days of pool partying, alcohol, drugs, and even orgies. The men gave them designer clothes and bath suits they could model for them. Occasionally, they would be gifted jewels, purses, cash, and the like. Whatever they wanted, they got it as long as they made the 7 hosts happy, which meant mostly sexual favors. By Monday morning, the 15 quote-unquote new girls were asked to get ready and meet in the dining room, where the good-looking woman was waiting for them. Rosa believed she was the main coordinator of the event, as she had seen her giving orders to some of the servants that had helped them all weekend. She told them something along the next lines. "Well, ladies, didn't you have an amazing weekend? You all made our very important hosts so happy. As some of you may have noticed, before you arrived, there were already some girls hanging around. They are part of our little organization. We normally throw parties like this for our clients all the time, and that's the least we do, to be honest. Our girls travel the whole world with our patrons. They appear in magazines and have their own houses, cars, and a lot of amazing things. The gifts you get to take home are only a little taste of what we can offer. If you are interested, please call the number on the card I'm giving you right now and we will arrange everything. But be fast. We have few positions available." They were later escorted to the SUVs, but as they got in, the woman said one last thing in a very somber tone. "Oh, darlings, all of this is extremely private, so I hope you don't start gossiping around. It would be a very inconvenient situation if someone we don't want finds out about it." Another 40-minute ride, Rosa reunited with us, still with a hangover, and told us about her adventure. When we found her, she was wearing a green dress, brown leather boots, gold earrings with matching bracelets and collar, and a black purse we had never seen before. Inside were 3 other pairs of earrings, 2 rings, a pearl collar, and a brand new iPhone X, along with some other clothes and her own phone. We later checked all of the things online to see the price. A total of $4,500 in designer clothes and jewelry, without counting the new cell phone. To this day, I don't know if Rosa ever considered calling the number, but we all saw her ripping the card away after our items research. She told us she was happy with her good luck, that nothing bad happened to her, but she didn't want to risk it in another round with this organization. From when I was about 11 to 14, I had a best friend named Spencer. He had a decent-sized family and a big house. We hung out practically non-stop outside of school. He was homeschooled and I was in public school. During the summer, I practically lived at their house. Spencer had an older brother named Keenan. He was about 5 years older than he and I thought he hung the moon. He was so cool. He listened to cool music, played guitar, and I always wanted to be around him. One summer when I was 13, Keenan went to summer camp. He was supposed to visit the Grand Canyon and go kayaking and do a ton of fun stuff. We were jealous. It was weird not having him around all the time since I basically stayed at their house the entire time. Finally, the day came where Spencer's dad was supposed to go to the airport to pick Keenan up. We were super stoked to hear all about camp. His dad drove up and we ran downstairs to greet them, and yet we didn't see Keenan. His dad had tears running down his face and he exclaimed, "He didn't make it. He didn't make it, you guys." My heart dropped into my stomach and I started to panic. Keenan walked up right behind him and they both started laughing. It was a dick move. Anyways, we helped him unload his luggage and stayed up until midnight talking about his summer. He had so much to say. Said that he had the time of his life and told us all about how he almost went overboard whitewater rafting and how he surely would have drowned if he did. As 2 13-year-old boys, we were enamored by Keenan and everything he did. We talked about how Spencer and I were going to the same camp once we turned 18. It had been a long day and it was time for all of us to go to bed. Keenan told us he would tell us more in the morning when we woke up. I had fallen asleep and awoken in a cold sweat because of a nightmare I had. In my dream, Spencer and I had gone about our entire day that day just as we had before, except when their dad showed up and joked about Keenan dying on his trip. He actually did die. This was practically my idol and my dream is so vivid. I needed to go and get some water just to calm myself down afterwards. I checked my phone before I headed to the kitchen and it was 3:30 a.m. The house was so dark and I had to tiptoe to be quiet and make sure to not wake anyone up. As I walk through the den on my way to the kitchen, I see the moonlight spilling into the living room, the only light in the house. I see what I think is a large silhouette, and as I get closer and my eyes adjust, I see Keenan hanging from the ceiling fan. I freak out and run across the room in a dead sprint and turn the light on to see if my eyes were deceiving me. It was him. Except he was asleep and standing in the middle of the room underneath the fan, with one of his arms raised straight up over his head. I never knew Keenan to sleepwalk before, and luckily he snapped out of it before I tried to wake him up. He looked at me super confused, looked around and noticed where he was and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys. I guess I developed a bit of a sleepwalking habit at camp." For context, I am a female in my 40s. I am single and currently not looking for anything. The day of this occurrence, I had gone out to lunch with a group of friends. This group included a male, 30. We will call him Jay. This is obviously important later. After getting home from lunch, I had taken a long walk around my neighborhood. By the time I got home, it was getting to be late, around 8 o'clock-ish. I then made what now was an awful decision, to go to my local grocery store because I didn't have anything for myself or my cat to eat. I made the short drive to the store and began my shopping. For some extra details, the store was a Kroger. It was pretty large in size, so you could go to another side of the store and most likely not see somebody from the first side again. After getting a few items, I headed over to the produce aisle. Because of the time, the store was mostly empty, so when a man walked out from behind a shelf, it took me by surprise. This man was around 6'5" to my 5'6". He had an unkempt stubble and messy short black hair. Looking back at it, he looked high on something. He quickly approached me and began a conversation. Stupidly, wanting to seem friendly, I answered many of his smaller questions. After just making small talk about food and such, I tried to end the conversation because I was uncomfortable and needed to continue shopping. Before being able to walk away and say goodbye, he lowered his voice and asked me something along the lines of, "You're pretty. Let's go out for drinks tonight." This took me by complete surprise, yet I was able to quickly retort with the "I have a boyfriend" line, following that up with, "I have to go. Have a nice night." However, I couldn't even leave before he blocked my path out of the aisle with his cart and kept trying to talk me into drinks. "What's wrong with having two men? Just one drink," he said. At this point, I was annoyed and uncomfortable. I was about to tell him to move when out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jay walking towards me. I rushed with a sense of relief, and the creep must have been scared because he speed walked away. "Jay, hey, I didn't know you were going to be late night shopping like me. I ran out of time after our lunch today and needed some food." Me, "Yeah, I had to get dinner items." "Listen, Jay, that man over there has been making some creepy conversation with me and he's watching us." While talking to Jay, I had noticed the man looking at us from across the aisle now. Jay subtly looked over while I was explaining what the man had said. Jay offered to shop with me, which I accepted. As mentioned earlier, if you were to go to the other side of the store, you would end up losing previously seen people. That is, if they aren't following you. So when Jay and I saw this man almost hiding behind some pop-ups in the dairy aisle, I started to get a bad feeling again. Jay noticed him following us as well and told me to ignore it as we finished getting our stuff. After getting all of our items and seeing him a few more times, we went to the self-checkout and purchased all of our items. However, before we could walk out, he was there, walking around the exit, not leaving or looking for anything, but almost guarding it. We made eye contact and he gave me an absolutely menacing grin. I told Jay about what he was doing and he suggested we wait a little while away from the exit and see if he leaves. That is exactly what we did, spending around 40 minutes talking. Thankfully, the creep left out the exit. Jay offered to walk me to my car and I accepted. As we were bringing our things to my car, in the now basically empty parking lot, there was a car in the spot right next to mine. We stopped dead in our tracks because I believed that was the man's car, now waiting for me. If that was his car, the man must have seen that I was still with Jay because the car turned on and left the lot. I got home safe that night and I genuinely believe that Jay must have saved me that night. I'm so grateful for that coincidence for our timing. So, to the creep at Kroger who stalked me, potentially waited for me in the parking lot, it may be worse if not for Jay. I hope we never meet again. So this takes place right around the summer of 2012, if memory serves. I and my younger friend AD, very much like a younger brother to me, got jobs through his mom's friend working the garden section at our local Home Depot. We were total freaking stoner drug addicts who didn't give a fuck. Baking, clocking out for lunch, and taking an hour and a half on our lunch break to smoke weed while getting paid still, and avoiding any and all forms of work. I was trying to talk to AD into not being a total piece of crap at work, but we just had too much fun together being crazy. Now, our boss and the lady who hired us, Robin, was a really hard worker who really cared about how good the garden section looked, and was always raving about her boss, Cooper. Now, when I say raving, I mean, wow, she wanted to have this dude's kids. Like, she was always going on and on about what a stand-up, great, hard-working, charismatic dude he was. He's just so wonderful. He runs 7 garden centers and Home Depots across 3 different states, and he does such a good job. I just don't even know what we would do without him, she said. We were just teenagers, but we were already sensing something off with how much Robin raved about this dude. Finally, the day comes when AD and I get to meet the regional manager, Cooper. We didn't give much of a rip beyond finally putting a face to the name Robin had hammered into our heads over the past 2 months. A young, healthy-looking guy in his mid-30s walks up to us with a huge smile plastered on his face. I have to admit, before he even walked up to us, there was something different about this guy's energy. As he walks up, we realize he has a pregnant woman accompanying him. What followed was the most strange, ethereal conversation I had in all of my 19 years of life at that point. Hey man, I've heard a lot about you. Yeah, and you're Cooper, I assume. Nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you too. He reaches out to shake my hand and says something similar to AD and shakes his. He says something along the lines of, "This is my fiance. We are expecting in a few months," and gestures to the woman beside him. She quietly smiles. Now when I tell you this guy launched into the weirdest tirade of my life. Wow. You're an emotional guy and you're very in touch, aren't you? You probably cry a lot. That's a good thing. Now, I have always been very comfortable with crying as a dude. If I feel like shedding some tears, whether happy or sad, I'm going to do that. But I probably cry about 3 to 5 times a year, honestly. By no means do I do it a lot, and it sticks out to me to this day because of how weird it was. Then he starts telling us the secret and how the law of attraction is real, and keep in mind, this is before the New Age wave where everybody knew about the book. It was actually my first introduction to all that stuff. This guy had so much charisma. It was honestly unnatural. After finally meeting him, I had a better understanding of why and how Robin was so obsessed with this dude. I came away from that conversation feeling truly exhilarated, and the dude knew how to get into people's heads. AD and I could feel that from one of our encounters. Now skip to about a month or 2 later. After AD and I had inevitably got fired, I woke up to Robin calling me at 9 AM, which was weird considering I didn't work for her anymore. I groggily answered, "Yes, Robin?" "Hey, remember Cooper?" "Yes, Robin, I do. He just strangled his fiancée, raped her dead body, and then called the police on himself." I don't even know how to react to the news. All I could think of was the fact that I had shaken hands with a sociopathic murdering rapist not 2 months prior. And the truly strange part, I did not feel like I was around a dangerous person at all. His energy was all over the place and unorthodox. But sinister? No. Compared to the lady my sister and I walked by in a steak and shake at age 9, and I remember looking into her eyes and knowing I had just looked into the eyes of an evil person and or demon. I will post a news article in the comments. Come to find out, this dude was not engaged to her, and the kid she was pregnant with wasn't even his. Crazy frickin' people, man. Wild. I never felt in danger, but in hindsight, I think this is a pretty creepy encounter. This story happened when I was in college. There was something about my early years in college that just seemed to bring on a slew of experiences that ranged from creepy to terrifying. I don't know what it was about that time in my life. The experience was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Anyways, one night at the beginning of summer, following my freshman year of college, some of my high school friends and I were going to a party. We hadn't seen a ton of each other in the preceding year because of all of us being away at college, mostly just during school breaks and a few random weekends here and there. So we were all feeling kind of giddy at having the whole summer together. I wouldn't have normally gone to this party hosted by someone else that we went to high school with, but they all wanted to go and I wanted to hang out with them, so I agreed. This is not the mistake I made in the story. That would come later that night. We got to the party and we realized it was almost exclusively people from high school, which was kind of nice actually. It was like a big reunion. Soon my prior inhibitions were gone, and that was only partially because I started throwing back screwdrivers the moment I got there. A couple of hours later, I was more than a little bit tipsy. Nah, I was full on drunk, though not totally plastered yet, which would prove to be my saving grace in this story. After a while, a group of my friends finally decided to split off. The host of this party, Stephanie, lived in her parents' house still, and it was in the middle of nowhere, basically near a forest. Forests at night both scare and enthrall me, so drunk me suggested that we go exploring. This is something my friends would not let me live down, like not ever. So anyway, this group, Lauren, Hillary, Jared, Alex, Hugo, Dean, and hostess Stephanie, plus myself obviously, decided to go on a midnight walk through the woods. It was pretty creepy, not gonna lie, but in a cool kind of way. At least I thought so. A couple people in the group, namely Hillary and Alex, were pretty afraid, but Hillary went because of her best friend was Lauren, and Alex had a thing for Hillary and Lauren, which was a whole thing. Not the point of the story, but because of that, they were both there. They kept making comments about how creeped out they were, and I kept telling them to relax. No one else is out there, I told them. Let's just enjoy this time together. Being drunk makes me feel weirdly sentimental, okay? We walked through the forest a bit, and then we came into this clearing with a lake and dock and tall grass and stuff, plus a shed and what turned out to be a boathouse, both of which had seen better days. Now, Stephanie and I weren't exceedingly close, so this was my first time exploring this forest, but Dean and Hugo had been here before and remembered this place. They mentioned that they thought Stephanie's parents forbade them from going back here because it wasn't their property, which was true. It was like suddenly Stephanie realized where we were. I wasn't the only one drunk, okay? And her eyes got super wide and she looked nervous. Not scared exactly, more like worried that we'd get in trouble, and she said we should go back. I told her that everything was fine since you can totally trust the judgment of a drunk person, and because everyone else was drunk, they all agreed with me. Save for Steph, but she was outnumbered and not about to go back alone. Even Hillary and Alex were okay with staying, and because logic is a friend to drunk people everywhere, I suggest that we play hide and seek, and mostly everybody agreed. Honestly, I don't know why people kept listening to me. Now if I'd been sober, this was the kind of place I'd be freaked out about. In a cool way, sure, but not in a let's play hide and seek kind of way. This is where things go wrong. Hugo was forced to be it because we were assholes and told him he didn't have a choice, so he went into the woods and counted while we all ran to hide. I saw Dean dart into the shed, but everybody else ran into the woods. I decided to duck down in the tall grass, which varied in height. Sometimes I could kneel and sometimes I had to be on my stomach to be totally concealed. As I was hiding, I heard voices from the trees nearby. Whispers, like the speakers were trying to not be heard. I was curious, so I made my way all the way towards the voices, first on my hands and knees, and then eventually army crawling as soon as the grass got shorter. I nearly cracked myself when I ran into Stephanie in the grass, who turned out to be doing the same exact thing as me. When we got closer, we realized that it was Lauren and Jared, and that was how Steph and I realized that they liked each other. We were listening to them flirt and looking at each other hopefully, and I swear we had a telepathic conversation about how good they would be together. But that was when we heard someone barreling towards us through the grass. Heart pounding, I turned to see who it was, just as Hugo threw himself next to Stephanie and me, and he looked terrified. Hugo, what the heck? I whispered, hissed, because there's no way he'd counted as high as we were making it. We were being real jerks to him that night. Sorry, man. He first looked around frantically and then told us what had him spooked. I'll never forget this because of the sheer terror I saw on his face and heard in his voice. There's someone in the woods, he told us. Stephanie tried to tell him that it was probably somebody else from the party, but Hugo said no. He'd seen the guy and hid behind a tree, and this guy seemed to be in his 40s, he explained. And he said the guy looked rough too, and he just had a bad feeling, so he booked it. It was just chance that he'd found Stephanie and me. He's looking for something or someone, he said, telling us that the guy was shining a flashlight around. As if on cue, somebody came walking out of the woods, and then he yelled out, "Jim, are you out there?" He sounded kind of angry, and now I felt stone cold sober. This wasn't right, and it was about to get worse because that was when we saw the shadow of somebody rowing a boat down the lake towards the dock. The first guy walked onto the dock to meet this guy, Jim, presumably, and I heard him demand, "Where is he?" The first guy sounded angry, like he was expecting another person to be there too, and the second guy, Jim, informed the first, I screwed up. They proceeded to argue, though I couldn't hear what they were saying, and when they went into the boathouse. I was pretty sure that no one had hidden in there, but I was worried about that plus the fact that two shifty guys were doing what seemed to be pretty shifty things. We needed to get out of there. I knew that, but Dean was still in the shed, which was too close to the boathouse for comfort given the situation. Lauren and Jared were now making out and totally oblivious, and Hillary and Alex were who knows where. Why had I suggested hide and seek? That was what I kept asking myself while I tried to formulate a plan. And we heard somebody running through the woods, but like they were trying to do so quietly, and I turned to see Hillary. It looked like she was trying to find somewhere else to hide, unaware of what was happening. And I saw her run towards the boathouse. It was like time stopped and I didn't know what to do or how to stop her. Honestly, I froze, but then Hillary hesitated when she got to the door. She would later tell us that the voices she heard inside made her pause. And then the door swung open. It was like something out of a movie. Hillary was now hiding behind the door, and the first guy stood in the doorway looking around. I think he must have heard Hillary, who was not being nearly as quiet as she thought she was. If he closed that door from the outside, he would see her, and then we would be well and truly screwed. Luckily, he went back inside and closed the door. We had to get the heck out of there, but still had to get Dean, Lauren, and Jared and find Alex. We didn't have a lot of time. I didn't think, so we had to be fast. Then suddenly Hugo stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed. "Caw, caw." He apparently thought we were in a movie. I just looked at him with a "what the heck, dude" expression on my face. It was not what I would have done, but I'll be damned, it worked. Hillary came sprinting towards us, as did Alex, who had been hiding behind the boathouse. Likewise, Dean emerged from the shed, and Lauren and Jared detached themselves from each other. Alas, the two men in the boathouse heard us too and came busting out. But by that point, we were all sprinting away. I swear I've never before nor since run that fast, and at one point Stephanie tripped and I practically ripped her arm out of its socket while pulling her to her feet. Sorry, Steph. The guys chased us for a bit at least, though I don't know how long because we just kept running until we got back to Stephanie's house. The party was still going and the men hadn't followed us beyond the woods, but we were too freaked out to stay. I called my brother to come pick us up and we all left. Even Stephanie, who left her house unattended save for the drunk partygoers. We spent the night at my brother's house that night, and then we went back to Steph's house to clean up the next day, because honestly, this experience kind of bonded us in a weird way. Lauren and Jared are now married. Hillary and Alex were both in the wedding. Alex even briefly mentioned this incident in his speech. I lived with Dean for a bit following college, and Hugo is one of my best friends, as is Stephanie, which is weird because we weren't really friends before that. But I swear, we thought we were going to die that night. All of us. Except maybe Lauren and Jared. Even Dean heard what was happening outside the shed and was waiting for the right time to make his escape. You can go through something like that and not come out closer. It's strange, but also kind of nice. Like, we've had this shared history, which was true before this, because of going to school together, but it's different now. I wanted to go back to investigate in the light of day, but only Dean wanted to go with me, and I thought maybe that wasn't enough people. I was still pretty spooked, though intrigued. Stephanie told us later, though, that she told her dad when her parents got home later that day, and he and a few of his friends went back there and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They moved shortly thereafter. Not because of this, so we never found out what happened, but we've also never forgotten it. In 2020, I was in the second year of graduate school. Even before the pandemic, many of the classes were online instead of in person. Normally, this was not a problem, but since my parents lived in a rural area, I had to commute to use the school's internet for my schoolwork. When COVID hit, all of my tests had to be taken online, and the literal 3 Mbps my parents got on their satellite internet connection would not be good enough to help me with my schoolwork. If my university were to lock down and send the students home, I would have to withdraw for a semester. Since this was not an option, I began searching for apartments in the smaller college town. After a short search, I was surprised to find an opening at a student complex, 3 miles from campus. Not having any options, I signed a lease and moved in the next week. Eventually, my predictions came true and the university locked down. I felt extremely lucky to have one of the few coveted spaces in town. Even as I walked into the office to get my keys, there were literally people crying on the steps. Did they know someone with COVID? Did they have a bad home life? I thought. I genuinely felt bad for them. Whatever their situation, I thought I had dodged a bullet. Little did I know these things were about to take a turn for the worse fast. The apartment was very poor quality, but it was the cheapest rent in town. It was all my cash could cover, so I was happy to have it. However, the lack of a security deposit and the ability to pay your rent up front meant that, unfortunately, desperate people started to move in. About 5 months into lockdown, there seemed to be very few students left living there, and many of the remaining residents seemed to be in their 30s or later. I heard a lot of rumors about drug dealing going on in the complex, but wrote it off because every college except BYU and Liberty has a large weed culture. Eventually, however, people started to find syringes in the landscaping, and the gravity of the situation became more obvious. Rumors continued to circulate, but I wrote them off. That was until one summer afternoon when I was riding home on my bike from Whataburger. My apartment was in one of the rear buildings of the complex, so I had to ride through the parking lot to get to my door. As I pulled through, I noticed 4 or 5 police vans parked in front of the building. It looked like a massive drug bust, so I called my friend Mike over to come take a look at the situation. He lived across from me, so it was a quick walk for him to come over. We watched the commotion from my balcony for an hour, speculating on what it could be. We both agreed that one of the dealers probably was busted and was on his way to prison. That was until we saw the men in dress shirts and ties walking out of the complex, wearing surgical gloves. We saw on the news the next day that the man living in that apartment was murdered in broad daylight after walking out of his apartment. Supposedly, he was shot while exiting and died on the way to the hospital. We never found out why, and I don't think the police ever caught the person who did it. I don't know if they had a suspect. All I know is that I was glad I was out when all of this was going on. At the very least, I could have witnessed something that would have scared me for life. I've since moved into another nicer complex in the city and don't have to worry about such things. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. I met Mr. Creep there. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my desk job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion. It made me feel safe. One night, I was leaving work and had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try to open it. I looked into his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil I saw. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied and tried to impress me and tried to invent ways of being alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I avoided him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I sent all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes it would help. Mr. Creep slithered away after that, but I always looked over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance as well as a huge acreage he owned. It made me nervous and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. Then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I'm so glad to know he's locked up, but so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts about him were. I feel like I escaped him. I'm a 24-year-old girl, but at the time of this story, I was about 16, and my younger sister was about 14. We were living in a pretty bad neighborhood, along with my mom, just the 3 of us, as my 4 older brothers had moved away and my dad had passed away 3 years prior. The house we lived in was old and in kind of bad shape, but we kept it very clean and nice on the inside. It had its benefits though. It came with a huge backyard. I'm talking one full backyard complete with garage-sized tool shed that was totally dilapidated and abandoned. But we couldn't afford to tear down and also held sentimental value. Right at the edge of our short metal fence and on the other side of the fence was a large unfenced plot of land that also belonged to us. We called it the back 40. Now, my mom is not mentally all there. She has the mental and emotional capacity of a 15-year-old girl, but she is so stunningly beautiful, few people notice. She's also a bleeding heart. meaning that she was very trusting and wanted to save the world while not making very smart choices and honestly putting her tiny 4'11", 90-pound self in a lot of danger, as well as me and my sister a lot. One of the people she constantly tried to save was her best friend Karen. Karen was your typical white trash. Hardcore, drink a fifth of cheap vodka in the morning type of alcoholic. She would show up at our place hammered a few times a week, sometimes for good/money to hang out. To steal the change off my dresser. You get the idea. Well, one day she shows up with a camper and a borrowed truck. She tells my mom she needs somewhere to keep it, because her new husband kicked her out. I immediately think it's a bad idea. It looks like it hasn't been touched since the 70s. It probably has rats and it's probably stolen. But my mom, being the bleeding heart she is, says fine, you can park it behind the shed. I agree because at least then it won't be an eyesore. Mistake number 1. She parks it between the metal fence and the back of the shed, so just the very end of it and the hitch are visible from the front of the shed. We all kind of forget it exists for a few months. Then one day our cousin abandons a puppy at our house. It's a pit bull and it takes to us immediately. We love him unconditionally and he loves us back just as hard. We don't even mind that he barks at anyone walking by or any new people in the house. He usually barks, sniffs, and then loves them anyways. We begin to feel kind of safe at the house, a feeling I hadn't had since the last of my brothers left home. A few months later, it's summertime and my mom is teaching summer school, so my sister and I are home alone. It's about noon and we decide to go sunbathing in the backyard. We toss on our bikinis, grab towels, and lie out in the sun. Reading and talking, bonding like only a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old can. But I start to feel uneasy. I start to feel like I'm being watched. I don't know why, but I just get the feeling we should go in. My sister is a very nervous girl sometimes, prone to crying and breaking down when she's spooked. She's the baby of 6 kids, can't blame her. And I don't want to alarm her in case it's nothing, so I just tell her I'm hungry and we should go inside. She agrees quickly and I can tell she's rushing as she grabs her stuff. Dang, she feels it too. Probably doesn't want to seem like a baby though. We basically run inside the house. Our kitchen is at the back of the house with a big window above the sink. We stare out of it and we can see the whole backyard. As soon as we're inside, my sister asks if I felt like I was being watched and I said yes. We have a creepy neighbor who is in love with my mom's ex-husband, Karen's ex-husband, who sometimes creeps around the woods next door. My sister says maybe it's him. Normally I would agree, but I knew he was currently in jail for arson. I start to get freaked out, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I see a flash of a man near the old camper, behind the fence. It's so far away and he moves so quickly I didn't get a good look. My sister sees it too and freaks out. Our pit bull is too short to see out the window, so he sits calmly at our feet. My sister calls his name and, thinking quickly, lets him out the back door. He goes running out, catching the scent of an intruder. Our view is blocked by the shed, but we lock the back door and crack the window, and we watch and listen to him barking viciously. A man's voice saying something, then more barking and a struggle, then nothing. We can't see what's going on, but we are freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I turn around and lock the front door, double check the windows, and snap the back window shut. I still can't see my dog, and now I can't hear anything either. My heart is pounding. This kind of neighborhood. The cops take hours to come. I'm struck with the memory of calling 911 when my dad collapsed, before I knew he was dead as soon as he hit the floor from a massive heart attack. Telling the operators my dad was dying. It took them about an hour to show up. What could some man do to us in an hour? I'm so scared because above all else, I love my sister. I grab a steak knife from the counter and hide the rest in a drawer. My sister comes bounding down the stairs, already on the phone, telling the operator what's going on. I tell her to go sit in the living room and try to see if the neighbors are outside, maybe flagging one down. All of a sudden, our dog comes bounding around the side of the shed, happy as a clam. I can see the back door from the window and I check to see if it's clear. It is. He reaches the back door the same time I do and I let him in, slamming the door shut behind him. My sister comes running in and we both examine the dog to see if he's been hurt. What we see at that moment still makes me nauseous to think about. We look at each other embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I don't know if my sister is old enough to know what we are looking at. We are silent until she breaks the quiet. Is that cum on his face? I threw up in the sink. That answers her question. I lift my head from the sink and out the window. I see a man jump the fence towards the back 40 away from us and take off running into the woods that neighbor our house. My sister, still on the phone, doesn't mention what we found on our dog's face. Out of embarrassment, out of fear, maybe because she was scared to admit that she knew what cum looked like. I really don't know. Those are the reasons I don't mention it to the cops who show up 45 minutes later though. I'm assuming her reasons were similar. The cops thoroughly checked the woods, but the guy is long gone. They checked the shed, but it had obviously not been entered in years. Finally, they checked the camper. Somebody had been living in there for a while. Clothes, CDs, CD player, dog toys, food, needles, and other drug paraphernalia were found inside. The dog toys explained how the guy was able to calm us down long enough to mess with him. He was a sucker for a bone or a plushie toy. Police said it was harmless drifter looking for a place to live and told us to get rid of the camper. And we did that day. I'd like to say my mom learned a lesson, but she didn't. I did though. My sister is tougher than I thought, and she is probably ready for the sex talk. Hi guys, long-time lurker here. My former college roommate recently reminded me of an experience that just might belong here. In 2002, I was attending college full-time and was looking for a job with minimal hours so as to not interfere with my school schedule. At the time, students had access to a free newspaper in the dorms that was filled with coupons, articles, and classifieds. I picked up a copy one day hoping to find a babysitting gig, but a different kind of offer caught my eye. The ad stated a local company was searching for bikini models at the rate of $100 for a 1-hour photo session. Well, I had just signed with a modeling agency back home and had one bikini shoot under my belt already. I liked the idea of pocketing the $100 without giving my manager a cut. And I also figured I could add a photo from this shoot to build my portfolio. So feeling confident, I called the number listed on the ad. Nobody picks up, but the answering machine instructed callers interested in the bikini shoot to leave your phone number and submit a photo to an email address that was provided. The message went on to say that if the company liked what they saw, they would call you if interested. Okay. So I did that later on that evening and hoped to get a call back. The next afternoon, I received a call, and the voice on the other end sounded like a man probably in his 40s or so. He said he would be the photographer on the shoot and said he had a few things to go over with me. But first he asked me to spell my name. Then it got weird. His voice lowered into an aggressive, almost growling tone as he said, "Kat, let's get something clear. I do not allow anyone other than myself and my model in my studio. I will not have someone telling me how to do my job. Hair and makeup people, that shit's on your own time." At this point he was practically yelling. I replied, meekly, "Okay," feeling uncomfortable and shocked. My answer seemed to put him at ease since his voice seamlessly transitioned to a calmer tone, asking if he could also take some video footage while I was in the studio with him. He said he wanted me to bring a miniskirt and panties so he could shoot upskirt shots and sell them to a team of producers. Okay, nope. At this point I was scared and ready to back out altogether. I said I would like to think about it and hung up the phone, feeling stupid and unnerved by the conversation. I figured since I hung up on him, he wouldn't call me back when the situation was over. The next day, the photographer called me from a different phone number. He sounded elated. "Kat, guess what? The producers want to meet you. I told them how great you were and that this could be a great opportunity. Can you drive to a city an hour away?" I said no thank you. I'd found another job that morning. Thanks for the offer. He was dead silent. "You know what? I bet I could get them to give you 200 instead of 100. There's a wooded area out there where no one could see you, and I bet they would even buy you a bus ticket. I'd pick you up, but my brother has my car." I hung up the phone again, pretty freaked out. About 30 minutes later, I received an email from a woman that supposedly worked for the company that she was allegedly putting together this weird bikini shoot. She introduced herself and immediately started talking up the creep that I had been in contact with, telling me he was so talented and nice. She wrote something like, "Just between us girls, I think he's so cute too." And she attached a picture of the photographer to seemingly prove her point. It was then that I figured it was the photographer posing as a female. The verbiage of the email just sounded off. I never replied and never heard from the dude or his female alter ego again. So yeah, extremely creepy photographer. Keep the money and the psycho tendencies and let's not meet. Oh yeah, and this took place in Orlando. I feel that is something I should have added. My friend June and I were 15 or younger when we used to hang out all summer, riding her quad down to the river by ourselves. Her father didn't really care how long we were gone, as long as we were safe. But he worked nights as a prison guard in a different city, so he wouldn't really know if we were either way. Well, usually things went fine. We stayed on the quad, messed around like teenagers do, got in the water and went home. We almost always brought June's dog, Bo, and he was always useful to keep creeps away because of his size. He was a bloodhound. However, one day we stayed later than usual and it was getting pretty dark. We'd stayed late before, but we didn't like to do it often, so we packed up and left. We got all the way home, put Bo away in the house, locked the quad up, and realized that June didn't have her cell phone on her. Determined not to be murdered by her dad in the morning when he found out she'd lost her phone, we decided to go back for the phone. Unfortunately, the quad was low on gas at this point though, so we had to take the 2 spare bicycles. At first, we were only panicking because June's phone was missing, because that's a pretty big deal all by itself, but our unease grew as we rode past 2 vehicles that hadn't been on the path to the river before. The trucks were parked next to each other, and as we went by, the men exchanged goods of some sort. One of the men stuck something down his pants, and I was pretty sure I'd just seen my first drug deal, and I'd always been taught that I would die for that. I didn't know though, obviously. June waved at the men, which I remember cringing inwardly at. I don't know why I thought it was a bad idea, but I strongly believed that it would get us in trouble. We made our way to the area where we'd been sitting, searched the few places we thought it could be, and eventually found the small silver device. It was on some river rocks, thankfully unharmed, though from its position it must have fallen off of the quad. We tried to go around where we knew the vehicles to be by going through the brush, since we knew the area pretty well and we were both extremely uneasy. There was a rustle in the bushes to our right, and we both froze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I almost made direct eye contact with something. Its eyes were glowing. I let all of my air out at once. It was just a deer. It ran toward us, and despite knowing what it was now, we screamed a little bit. We gave up on going around. It was too dark, and nature would always be one step ahead of us, we decided. This was in early high school. We didn't have flashlights on our phones to see with. To our dismay, on our way back on the original path, the vehicles were there, or at least one of them was. It's hard to remember, in all honesty, and it still creeps me out to talk about the situation. We were sure that we were going to get killed, kidnapped, or worse. I remember seeing headlights pointed at us, and we rode our bikes to the right as quickly as we could. But I was always the weaker of the 2 of us, so I was falling behind. June was yelling at me to hurry up, and I'm pretty sure I had started crying at that point. I was so sure that if they had got one of us, it would be me. We got ahead of them enough to reach a slight curvature in the blackberry bushes that separated this part of the path from the main area, and June grabbed my hand to pull me down into the bushes. The thorn scraped against my exposed skin. I always wore shorts with my bikinis, but the rest of me was still open to the weapons of the bushes. It was worth it though because they couldn't see us. We could hear them though. They idled their car nearby, got out, looked around a little bit. Where did they go? Did you see where they went? I thought they went this way. They got back in the car eventually, and the headlights faded further, closer to the river, further from our way home. So we bolted. We grabbed our bikes and we pedaled as fast as our legs could take us. We hoped so hard that we wouldn't be followed. We finally made it home safely, locked the gate to the yard and went inside, and we watched the road for a while. Nobody went by. Eventually, we left the window alone. It was late. We went to the river the next day. It was a usual thing. There was something different, though, about the blackberries that we had been hiding in. They'd been crushed, ran over multiple times by a car until they were almost completely flat. I don't like to think about what would have happened if we had stayed in our oh-so-perfect hiding spot any longer. I have this friend. I'll just use his first letter R, who I believe has been stalking me for the past 2 weeks, if not longer. I'll give some background info, and then get into the problem that I'm in. Thanks in advance for any advice and help. We met back in 2014 in high school. He was always a quiet but nice and easygoing guy. We grew very close, and I saw him as a brother. He didn't have a very smooth childhood. He saw his parents argue a lot, often for years. His mom even cheated on his dad, and he saw the effect it had on him and the whole family. But you wouldn't suspect anything out of the ordinary just meeting him at first. Around 2016, he started to become a bit paranoid and would seem a bit pessimistic at times. He never had many friends. Neither did I, for that matter. We had 2 other friends together that we saw often, and we were the only ones he trusted. I saw him have this strange panic attack where he ran out of a restaurant we were at, and he ran to a nearby park and yelled at people. I called his dad to come get him, and he got him in the car and gave him a pill. Apparently, this had been the second time this happened recently then. Fast forward to June 2021, in between that last episode and attack and now, R seemed normal as could be. But I noticed he was a bit off and has been since then. He met a girl in college months before that he says he fell madly in love with, but she rejected him when he asked her on a date and blocked him on everything right after graduation. Apparently it took a massive toll on his emotional and mental state. He had another episode where he ran outside his house and actually provoked someone, and they punched him in self-defense, and then his parents took him to the hospital during that summer, and he was officially diagnosed with schizophrenia. So from late 2021 until now, I've noticed he's quieter, still cracks jokes, and can have a decent conversation with him and still seems like a nice guy. But there's some stuff recently that I truly think is alarming, and this is why I'm making this post. So I'll cut to the chase. For the last 6 weeks, we've hung out 3 times. This was actually after a hiatus where we didn't see each other since February this year because I started working more hours and went to the night shift. In each of those 3 hangouts, I've noticed he looks at me in a really strange way. Like he's horny and imagining me naked or imagining him hurting me. We are both male and heterosexual, by the way. Saying this to preface what I'll mention in a bit. He also mentions how he's still in love with that girl from school, but proceeds to call her all kinds of names, like slut and whatnot, and wants to assault and kill her right after. He has said this numerous times and even mentions going to the elementary school she goes to. He sent me a picture of that school on Google Maps with arrows pointed at it and firework emojis last week. He also admitted to having parked outside her home and sitting there for hours about 5 times back in 2021. For the past week, he's been insisting on hanging out several times a day, and when I was at Chili's with my parents on Saturday, he sent me a message saying, "Chili's." He's able to see me since I'm on the Snap Map on Snapchat, since I use the app often to talk to other friends. When I went to the mall right after, he said, "You are going to the mall again. You were there yesterday." Which is true. I went to the mall twice, once with mom and then with both my parents the day later to get some stuff since one of our favorite stores was closing, so we wanted to check out good deals. On the drive home that day, he messaged me saying, "You didn't work today. We should have hung out." I replied, "Maybe Wednesday," which was yesterday, and I didn't see him because I'm genuinely creeped out. So the day after, on Sunday, he again insisted on seeing me, but I went to go play soccer instead with other friends, and then went to go do laundry afterwards. And when I was at the laundromat, he sent me a soccer ball emoji and a laundry emoji, indicating he saw me on the snap map. Here's the thing, he keeps mentioning where I am, and it's always within like 10 minutes of me being on my phone. He's actually done this for the last 2 years, but never this frequently. It used to be like twice a month and I brushed it off, but now I'm noticing something actually concerning. He has also been calling me boyfriend and sending heart emojis the past week, and when I told him I might see him this week, which I won't, but I said so just to not make him mad because I'm actually fearful of him hurting me or others, he said, "You think I can wait that long to see my boyfriend?" This past Sunday, I didn't reply to him for 4 hours, and he kept asking if I'm mad and then said he wants me to reply no longer than a minute after he texts me each time. I have the feeling he's just constantly on his phone, looking for when I'm active on social media, and I really don't know why. He also admitted to me a month ago that he makes fake profiles to be able to gain access to that one girl's Instagram and looks at her pictures. And he even said that he masturbates to them. He said he uses the nudity apps to take her clothes off, he said. All of this is concerning. He currently doesn't have a job and hasn't had one for the last 2 years. I'm the only friend he sees and talks to, and I feel like he's developed a compulsion or fixation, or dependence, or mix of all three on me. And as I mentioned, he has said he wants to assault and kill the girl that used to be in his class. And he knows where she lives and he knows where she works. I have not mentioned my thoughts on this to him again out of fear. He currently takes risperidone daily, and he said he's been seeing a new therapist for just a month now, but I don't know if any of those are even working. I'm asking for any advice on how to approach this and what to do. My concern is that if I tell anyone like the police or the girl, he will find out and retaliate by hurting me or my family, as he knows where I live. Any help is appreciated. Also, if any of you think it's best to actually delete this in case he sees it, let me know. As I know, he has had Reddit before, but I am using a brand new account. Feel free to message me too. Edit. Okay, essentially, he kept asking why I'm not on the map anymore, and I got a bit ticked off and confronted him in a nice and civil way. And he pretty much said that all this stuff were jokes and he doesn't want to harm anyone. But I don't buy it. I feel like he's in denial. Any help? Final edit. He's in a mental ward, thankfully. Well, it's my cake day, and to celebrate, I present you this tale of nerdy horror. I am a complete nerd, and to prove this, I used to LARP heavily. You meet all kinds of people LARPing. The city I played in was near a military base, so there were a few Marines in our game. I'm a very outgoing person and make friends easily. I was well liked at the game, and I guess I caught the eye of one of the LARPers, named Nick Soros. At first, we were just acquaintances, just role-playing vampires along with a group of other people. Then he introduced me to a friend of his who I ended up babysitting for a number of times. I became good friends with her because of it. Fast forward. Nick, our mutual friend Melly, her husband, another couple, and I all went out to a Puerto Rican club one night. I was very attached to my Zune at the time and brought it with me everywhere. Well, me being the lush I am, I had drunk a decent amount that night and gotten a ride back home to my house from Nick. I ended up drunkenly leaving my Zune in his car, and when I noticed it was missing, I called him up and asked him to return it. He came to my house to drop it off and stupidly told me he had come across a topless photo I took. Me plus whiskey plus camera equals topless picture. At least at that time. But I digress. He told me he came across this picture while checking out my Zune to see if I wanted to buy one. His words. I tried to find the picture he was referring to. It turns out you had to scroll down to the 13th gallery and then scroll down to the last picture. Obviously, he was scoping out my pictures. I felt violated. I decided to ignore him because I was mad that he invaded my privacy in a way. A week later, my friend Danielle, a mutual friend of Melly and me, was over at my house. We had a thing for each other at the time. I was dyeing my hair red, blue and black that night and she was helping me. Around 10 p.m. that night, Nick calls. I ignore it. Then he called again and again. Up until the point where he would call, I wouldn't pick up, and then he would call immediately after. I was flying out to Florida to see my biological family the next morning from an airport about 2 to 3 hours away. I decided to pick up the phone and fake being asleep. I tried to convince him I was asleep and I had a flight early tomorrow, which was bending the truth a little bit. My flight wasn't that early in the morning. After I hung up the phone, he called back. Danielle had had enough. She picked up the phone. It was my cell phone, by the way, and told him off. When she hung up, we looked at each other and decided to go outside and have a cigarette. So we go outside my house and talk about Nick and how convoluted it was that he wouldn't leave me alone. I live on a cul-de-sac and my parents' house is near the end of it. My back is to the street and Danielle is facing me. Mid-sentence, her face changes expressions and she says, "What the heck?" I turn around to look at the street and I see someone walking towards us down the street. It's Nick. I decide to meet him at the bottom of my driveway. He basically says it's bullcrap that I've been ignoring him and we need to discuss our problems. By this time, Danielle is at my side and starts caressing my arm to give him a hint. This fellow isn't too bright and doesn't get it. Then he brings it down a notch. He quietly and softly says my name and that we should talk. I almost cave, but suddenly Danielle links arms with me and leads me back to my house. Our backs are to Nick and we're next to my parents' car. Danielle is on my left side. I see her go down on the hood of the car out of the corner of my eye. And I hear her scream, "Get your effing hands off me." Then I feel an arm around my neck and something pressed against my temple. At this point I think I should be scared, so I force myself to cry for effect. As I'm being pulled up the street, I realize there's a gun to my head. That's when I really start to cry. Meanwhile, Danielle has gone back into my house and alerted my parents to the situation. My brave younger sister ventures outside to see what exactly is going on. She sees Nick dragging me up the street and reports to my mom that he has a gun. My mom and my across the street neighbor both call 911 and my dad comes outside to mediate the situation. He saved my life that night. Now at this point things start to blur because I'm so damn terrified. My dad comes out and says something to Nick about letting me go or something. Around this time, my legs finally give out and I drop to the ground. Nick points the gun at my dad and says, "Stop or I'll shoot you." Then he points it at me and threatens to shoot me. My dad is trying to talk to Nick and reason with him, all the while yelling at me to come back to the house where it's safer. I can't move. I'm frozen, crying and screaming. I finally find it in me to move, so I crawl to the sidewalk. Then a little bit while later, I get an adrenaline rush and run to my house. There's a big pile of dirt at the edge of my front yard where a fence used to be, and of course I don't see it and I trip over it. By now, Danielle has come back outside and is hiding behind her car. I happen to fall near her and she drags me behind her car with her. I'm still crying and I can hear my dad scream, "No, Nick, don't do that." I bursted out crying harder than before. Then I hear it. A helicopter. We're saved. Then a few minutes later, 5 cop cars came barreling down my quiet little street. Eventually Nick gives up and is apprehended. The cops then secure the scene. Danielle, my dad and I are told to get down on our knees with our hands up. My dad and I have a Kodak moment at this time as we hold hands in midair. Fast forward to me giving my statement to the main police officer in charge. His cop car is at the top of the street. As I'm talking, I realize we're right next to Nick's car. I pointed out to him. In his car, the cops found ammunition, rope, a knife, and binoculars. Nick told the cops flat out what his plans were that night. Apparently, he was going to kidnap us, bind and gag us, assault Danielle and ditch her, and talk to me. I call shenanigans. I know if he had me against my will, he would have his way with me. Sorry for the length. I felt the need to go into detail. Oh, and he got 10 years in prison in Northern California. For those of you wondering what happened to me as a result of this, I developed PTSD and severe paranoia, and I'm scared to death to walk alone at night. I constantly check over my shoulder to see if anyone is following me. I have a severe phobia of getting assaulted now and dissociative identity disorder. So basically, because of this dude, I hallucinate and hear voices, and I'm afraid of being by myself at night. So this happened to me several years ago when I was in middle school. I'd been invited to my best friend's little sister's birthday party as her one person that she got to invite. My family dropped me off and they went to a family reunion that I hadn't been very interested in going to. Let me preface this story by saying that even though I love my best friend, and we are still best friends to this day, her family and their friends were basically rednecks. I live in the South, so it's not exactly a surprise. I didn't know anyone at the party other than my friend, her mom and stepdad and her little sister. Her parents had a few friends there, and there were a few other random family members. After I get dropped off, I head inside with my friend. She tells me that they are going to be setting up a kid pool for her little sister in the front yard, and if I wanted to help watch the kids and hang out with her in the pool, I could borrow one of her swimsuits. She forgot to tell me before I came, so I didn't come with one of my own. I said sure. It was really hot that day and there wasn't much else for me and her to do anyways. I picked out a bikini and I remember it being a little bit big because my friend's mom had to help me tighten the strings on it. We all head outside. They set up the pool and everybody gets settled in their lawn chairs in the pool. Now, since the pool was one of those little blow-up ones that are maybe 8 feet long and barely 2 feet deep, I just ended up walking around it with a pool net thing, just getting leaves out when they fell in. I think my friend was sitting down in the pool and we were talking. The adults were just talking amongst themselves. I remember one of the adults seeming a little bit creepy looking, but I wasn't really paying attention to him much. After a while, we go back in the house and one of the older ladies pulls me aside. She told me that I shouldn't worry, but she wanted to tell me that the creepy looking dude had taken pictures of me on his phone while I was in the pool. She confronted him about it once she noticed, and he deleted all of the pictures. She told me that she didn't believe him though, and when he wasn't looking, she took his phone and actually deleted all of them. She explained that he probably would have shown his buddies the pictures of me to brag about how he did something with me. Or to me, really. Remember, I was in middle school and I have always looked younger than I actually am. This terrified me, but I tried to push it out of my mind, and I ended up not telling my parents because I thought they would never let me back at my friend's house again. Actually, to this day, they still don't know. Later, my friend told me that her stepdad had a serious talk with his friend about what he did, and I'm pretty sure he sort of cut him off after that. Sort of like a last straw type of thing. Looking back, I will always wonder why on earth he took pictures of me and what would have happened if the lady hadn't seen him taking them. Part of me thinks it was simply because I was in a skimpy bikini, and I was one of the only young girls there that wasn't a child. But it also scares me to think about what he could have done with the photos, or what he would have done to me if there weren't so many people around. So, creepy photographer, let's not meet again. I'm a very open-minded person. I don't like to judge books by their cover because so many do. I like to meet new people, and sometimes more off individuals take advantage of that. My family attributes it to the way that I dress interestingly or the fact that I'm very friendly. Well, this time it backfired. At the time, I was a sophomore and a theater major in college, so I was constantly in the arts building. One day, I get a friend request from this kid named Paul on Facebook. I saw that he was friends with a lot of my fine arts major friends, the year under me. So, I confirmed it. He started sending me pretty friendly messages, saying that he often saw me in the art building and wanted to say hello, but was awkward. No shit. Being the person I am, I kept it loose and cordial. One day, I was sitting outside a building on campus after Italian doing homework before my next class. From the corner of my eye, I see someone approaching very slowly. I lift my head and there's Paul. He slowly says, Monster mashup, right? As if it wasn't me. Yeah. Hi, Paul. I say with way too much warmth, trying to keep it light. When I say awkward, I mean as awkward as you can get, but I didn't want to judge or be rude. He also had this distinct character to his voice. Very bizarre and kind of like a villain in a movie. He had crazy curly hair and always carried around his sketchbook. He always came up with a reason to show me new sketches and to tell me super personal things about his life. Despite me not knowing him, his sketches freaked me out. Not that I displayed that, and they were usually violent and full of ugly cartoonish women, often topless or naked. On that first day and from that day on, when he would specifically find me outside, that building on those days, he would insist on walking next to me to my next class. Kind of started avoiding that spot. I really needed the time to get things done. He still continued to send me long personal messages trying to get to know me. He also commented on how pretty I was in my pictures. I started to get pretty uncomfortable with his aggressiveness. He would try to set up times for us to hang out, and I just really tried to avoid that as much as possible. I was in a play in a company outside of school at the time, and he showed up one night by himself, totally baked. Occasionally, I would glance at him and he would be staring at me. He sent me a message after the show saying I was the best looking one in the production. Shortly after that, I got a message with a link to a picture he drew of me. He had based it on one from my Facebook. To be honest, it was pretty cool and very colorful. Not at all like his other pictures. Then I got a message from him admitting his strong feelings for me. Kind of figured that was coming, but I politely told him that I appreciated his feelings and his friendship, but I was already seeing someone. My then long-term boyfriend. Oops. He freaked out, telling me that I was awful and he did all of those things for me. Coming to my show, drawing me a picture, telling me personal stuff I didn't want to know, that he never trusts anyone and I broke that. That he was going through a lot already and his dad just died that summer. That escalated quickly. I attempted to stay friendly and rational, but that didn't work at all. He cursed me out and blocked me. On campus, whenever I would see him, he would make a 90-degree turn and walk in a different direction. If I happened to be close, I would see him scramble to get away. About a year ago, so 3 to 4 years after that whole thing happened, I got a random message from a blank profile with the name Paul that said, "Thank you for contributing to my hatred of women." Really? Little ol' me did all of that. What a jerk. Funny thing is, he was at another show I was in with the same company recently and sat in the front row, slinking all the way down in his chair. Nope, can't see you at all, buddy. I also randomly see him around the city and it still sends a shiver up my spine. I often wonder if he ever drew me like those other women in his sketches or what he did to my picture. I'm 24 now, but remembered this recently and was telling my boyfriend the story about a week ago. When I was around 16 years old, a friend and I stayed over at a mutual friend's house. I live in a somewhat rural area, so there are houses around, but it's not very crowded. About half a mile or so from our friend's house, there was access to a swimming area. I think we called it coma water, because it was kind of dank and, hey, we were silly kids and we thought it was hilarious. But we threw our bikinis on anyway and headed down to the calm water. As the three of us walked through the field alongside a residential road behind our friend's house on our way to swim, we noticed a black sedan with two older men that we'd never seen before, possibly in their 30s or 40s, drive past us and slow down. We shared a look of disgust and thought the standard. Creepy old men. That girls get used to thinking from a very young age, but we didn't dwell on it. We swam for about an hour and a half and decided to head back. We left, talking and laughing, and took the same route home, past a cluster of houses. We made it less than halfway back when we saw reverse lights turn on down a subsidiary road. We all looked to see the same black sedan pull out and start driving toward us. We froze. I don't know who finally broke. It may have been me, but one of us screamed, "Run back!" Up ahead was just an open field. To our left was an open field. and to our right, the car was approaching. Going back was our only option. We ran as fast as we could in our bikinis and flip-flops and knocked on the first door that we found. An older couple on their way to church opened the door, and we breathlessly begged them to help us, knowing the car would still be waiting for us if we tried to walk or even run back. They were taken completely off guard, but eventually agreed to put towels down on their back seat and drive us back up to my friend's house. As an adult now, I'm sure they were scanning the area for anyone suspicious, but I pretty much blacked out during the car ride from the adrenaline. They made sure we got into the house safely, and we locked every possible entrance before calling the police. A state trooper came by about an hour later to take a statement from us. Our story and descriptions of the men in their car lined up with recent abductions of teenage girls of our age in the area. The cop didn't say it directly, but we were lucky that we were together and aware of our surroundings. I tried to find articles to corroborate this, but no such luck. Too many abductions to sort through. Hey everyone, I hope you're having a nice day. This encounter took place a year and a half ago, but I kinda want to share. So, it was a nice October evening. I was still in my senior year of high school. 16 female. I was attending some evening English classes at the time. I'm from a non-English speaking country, but I decided to skip since I was kind of worn out from all of the studying. Instead, I went to my favorite half library, half shop establishment in a mall. I actually went there on purpose to buy a Hunter Thompson book since I was and still am a huge fan of his works. However, once I came there, I noticed they had a concert evening, and some small hippie band was singing just near the shelves I needed to go to. This library is a 2-story establishment, with the second floor being really small and like a balcony. Basically, it was a big square first floor, and the second floor was as if this square was cut from the inside. Sorry, I can't explain it well, but the point is, you could see the whole library from any spot. There weren't any separate rooms. So I just get to the second floor and browse the biography and memoir shelves, thinking how I could get to my desired book. Nobody was even sitting near the band, so I anticipated that I wasn't allowed to get near them. There were a couple more people near me, but I didn't pay attention. Suddenly, a man came up behind me and said, "Excuse me, can I look at these books?" Being that I wasn't really interested in any of those and looked through them just to kill some time, I immediately replied something like, "Yes, of course," and shifted slightly to the right. When the man was directly near me, I could get a good look at him. The first thing I thought upon checking him out was that he looked very much like Mads Mikkelsen, maybe a slightly uglier version of him. He was well dressed and looked normal and presentable. I didn't think anything of him, but then he started talking to me. Asked something like, "Hey, what are you up to? Why are you here?" I was a little bit shocked since this man was obviously a lot older than me and I've always looked my age, maybe even a little bit younger. But I went along, replying something like, "Yeah, I'm here to get this book, but there's a band here and I don't know if I can get to it." He asked for my name. I was smart enough to give him a fake one. Then he started very eagerly talking about the author and gonzo journalism. And from his body language, I immediately understood what he was up to. My mother is a psychologist, so she taught me a lot of things about people and whatnot, so I picked up on his intentions very fast. This man was after me. We made small talk. I was obviously uncomfortable, but didn't know how to get out of this situation. He was talking non-stop, trying to hang on to me, and when at one point my phone buzzed, it just caught Wi-Fi. I thought somebody was calling me and turned around. He asked me if he was bothering me. Being a little bit polite myself, I said no with a little fake laugh. I should have just brushed him off really. So then came a really disturbing point when he asked for my age. I cheerily replied that I was 16, which by the way was true, thinking that would scare him away. But no. He didn't care that I was a minor. He just happily replied that he was 46. It got creepier for me, and when he offered a chat over coffee, I said something in the lines of, "But I'm just 16. I can't really hang around older men." To this, he replied something I remember very well with a very serious expression. "That's old enough. You were also just so attractive, that's why I approached you." At this point, I was hysterical on the inside. I mean, I knew that this guy couldn't try anything in a fairly crowded shop, but it was still scary. So I obediently went to a little dining lobby in the corner of the library, trying to brainstorm any strategies of retreat. Maybe it was a dumb idea, but I decided to say, "Oh, I actually have a dance class soon. I'll be late if I don't go now. So I'll get the book and we'll be going." He took it well and waited for me. I went straight for the book. I didn't even care about the band anymore. While I was at the counter paying for it, I really hoped I could slip away, but this man waited just behind me when I was about to book it out the door. He started asking me about my dance classes, what style I was learning, where my dance studio was at. I tried to give the vaguest answers I could, so he just dropped it and came straight to the point, scheduling a date. He kept rambling about this new bubble tea place, desperate to try to drag me into this. I just replied that it wasn't a good idea, and when he asked, "When then?" I just threw a never at him and speed walked away. He mumbled an "oh, okay then," and went the opposite way. Needless to say, it's not that creepy and really anticlimactic, but I was pretty shaken that evening. I don't even know why. I've always been catcalled a lot and hit on by older men, but this particular encounter was pretty unnerving, even though I don't think anything of it now. Every time I look at the book, I remember this man. I hope we never meet again. And yeah, one last thing. I learned a valuable lesson from this. Screw being polite in situations like this. I just finished my shift working as a receptionist for a gym. I worked the opening shift, so I was there from 4:30 a.m. until around 11 a.m. I hadn't slept at all the night before, so I decided to order an Uber so that I could get home as soon as possible. When I got into the car, he noticed my uniform and started asking me about my work. My boss, co-workers, and the customers, he kept asking if they were fit. Good-looking guys. I'm usually okay with idle chit-chat with Uber drivers, but this 20 questions game was a bit much. He then became insistent that I should use my looks to get promoted by flirting with my boss. Said things like, "Just promise that you'll sleep with him if he gives you a raise," and "Meathead guys are so stupid, they will do anything for a girl who smiles at them." I made a disgusted face and said I wasn't interested in sleeping with my boss, trying to deter the conversation. He said, "You don't actually have to do it. Just get the raise, and then if he tries anything, threaten to take him to HR." I kept saying I wouldn't do anything like that, and I found that kind of thing inappropriate. And he kept insisting that it was the only way to get ahead of my other female coworkers, and if I were a smart woman, I would use the advantages society gave me. At that point, I was completely done listening to him, but wasn't any closer to my home, so I stopped responding. He then said, "Oh, I get it. You're a good girl type. You are probably waiting for Prince Charming to take interest in you and beg you to marry him." Again, I said nothing. I'm not the type to defend myself to someone I'll never see again. He then went on a rant about how all marriages are a sham and it's impossible for any human to be monogamous with one person because it's just not in their instincts to only sleep with one person, and that I would be wasting my time being celibate because I should be doing it with as many men as possible since I'm biologically made to breed and take care of children, and that I would feel much more fulfilled if I just did that. This dude actually said all that out loud. Couldn't believe it. We finally made it to my address, and he turned around and asked if I had an Instagram and if he could follow it, then asked if I would rate him 5 stars. I told him I didn't have an Instagram and got out of the car and kept walking up the street, past my house until he drove away. This was in June in Asheville, North Carolina. My boyfriend and my dog and I were camping along the Appalachian Trail, along the river where we were kayaking. We had got done kayaking for the day, and we were relaxing at our campsite before dinner. Our site was only like 10 feet from the trail, and the river was right behind that. We had some dramatic and stressful events while kayaking that day, and we needed to unwind and relax. We were running low on weed, so we had just eaten some edibles because we are stoners and why not? My boyfriend was half asleep in his hammock. I was at the river's edge, and I was laying on a towel near the tent when a man came walking up to us, blabbing about giving us his trash. I was at first confused, but he was wearing a backpack and an Appalachian Trail shirt, so I quickly realized he was a serious hiker on the trail and wanted us to take his trash for him, which is a pretty reasonable request. However, we were only a 5-minute walk down the trail, and there was basic civilization, including a dumpster and whatnot, literally 5 minutes down the trail. I told him this because I'm sure he would rather just put it in the bin himself in that case. But he then pulled out a large bag of weed and said I could have some if I took his trash. I was a little confused, but I would never turn down free weed, so I was like, sure, whatever, we will throw it out. He gave me a small handful of nugs and threw his trash into our bag, and I asked him some small stuff like, "Oh, are you through hiking?" and whatever basic stuff. He said he was and had been for a couple of months, and asked if he could stay and drink a beer. And I was like, sure, this guy seems like he really just needs to talk to some people or something. And I wasn't doing anything, and he seems normal enough, so why not? I did think he might have only been there because I looked like a girl who was alone, if he hadn't noticed the hammock. But I thought at most he would be mildly disappointed he couldn't hit on me or whatever. My boyfriend popped his head up at some point, and the hiker did seem surprised to see him, which confirmed that he thought I was alone. He kept saying stuff like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people." Like, okay dude, I hope not. I was trying to be friendly and just ask some basic questions, more about trail stories, and the guy was answering normal enough. My boyfriend and I decided to smoke some weed by the river, and of course offered the guy some, because he had given us the weed in the first place. He hits it and coughs a bunch, and that's when stuff gets weird. As a stoner, we were used to seeing people get too high and act a little weird, but this guy was being incredibly strange. He talked and talked and talked, but it was so quiet we couldn't really hear a thing he said. I tried to seem interested and respond to stuff, but I had no clue what he was saying. He was just staring at the river, talking to himself, and then occasionally looking at us like we were part of the conversation, and me be like, "Oh, right, ha ha ha." It was so strange and confusing. He also drank like 3 beers at least, and 2 cigarettes during the time, so it was not a short amount of time. This man would not leave. He started talking to Siri on his phone when we stopped answering him, and he was like yelling at Siri, calling her a bitch. At one point out of nowhere, he goes, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer?" My boyfriend and I looked at each other like we had both just had the same thought, that this guy had just gotten way too creepy. We both nervously laughed and said, "Oh, 1, meaning not at all for sure." I tried to act casual like it was definitely a joke or something, but we were both thinking, what the fuck. After that, I said, "Nope, this guy's not welcome here," and I got in the hammock, and so did my boyfriend. And we kind of sat there talking to each other a bit, and not really acknowledging the guy. He had said he was going to smoke 1 more cig and then leave. And I swear, that was the longest cigarette I've ever witnessed in my life. It took him so long to finish it, and I was just watching it get shorter and shorter, hoping he would just leave already. He finally got up and put his stuff on and left. But it was almost dark, so we knew he would not go too far before setting up camp for the night too. That night, we thought for sure this guy would come back and kill us. Throughout the night, people did walk by on the trail multiple times, but it was other people we had seen on the trail during the day. One being a couple that seemed to be on drugs and maybe lived up the trail. We literally planned what we would do if he came back, which was grab the dog and jump in the river and float to the boat ramp downstream. Anyway, he didn't end up showing up that night and we didn't see him again, but it was enough to freak us out. It's possible this guy was just lacking some social skills and also had been in the woods by himself for a while, but it's also possible that he really had some creepy shit going on, and I'm definitely glad I wasn't alone when he walked up. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside of the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on Earth for a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from wise man's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes you walk through an abandoned old church, up near mom and dad's property line. You can feel good, warm, and happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer, when the sunshine is not too hot but it's not too cold. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that was definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school up at AB Tech, going to school for some automotive mechanics. I would go into class at about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home at about 10:30 p.m., depending on the traffic. Every night I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on I-40 because I just wanted to go home and go to bed. It was Thursday and there was no class on Friday, and I wanted to get in bed early so I could go into the woods and go hiking early the next day and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off of I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled down windows made any more noise. I have never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment something felt off and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and I happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where mom and dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to the power being out, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all of my old truck's gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there were barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on clear nights. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here and how many advancements in civilization it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. I heard the fence post I had left in my truck bounce out of my bed and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh no, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really set them off depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me go check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rear view mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog. Only it wasn't on 4 legs anymore. It stood up like a man well over 10 foot tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 foot tall at the shoulder on all 4s. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog, it was not a man, it was somewhere in between, and at the same time entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose, off of its emaciated and thin frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low, in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man's, but the very edges of its face seemed to not be totally defined. They seemed to move and change like something you would see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should have been. No hair, and the skin that was dripping off of its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog. Teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous, and true to the form of the rest of its unnatural look, many of the teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the indefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could have not been more than 5 seconds that I sat there paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its glades in that direction and tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs, like a man. I jammed my old truck in first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second gear and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both of my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all of the doors. I couldn't wake them up. I mean, who the hell would believe that? And at 10:30 on a Thursday night. The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dogs that got up to raise hell at outside animals at all hours of the night were dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I started to finally get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down to get some sleep, so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that shit was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face national forests, 500,000-acre woods. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement living room, with my little tactical 12-gauge loaded, tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand, so as not to make my presence known until need be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my father's office, I shined the light through the glass doors and at the edge of the woods. There stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tactical light, ran into the living room and flipped on the outdoor floodlights, and to my surprise, it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods. Still motionless, though. I swung the door open and fired every round I had into its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered, as it took off into the woods. The dogs went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gone to the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I knew they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years later. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's. Up on the side of the holler, there are kennels for her brother's hunting dogs. No longer in use and haven't been in years, but the fence is still there and the concrete pad is still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccination had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him, as he kind of liked solitude. This particular night, that we were coming home from a movie date in a neighboring town, was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking back to the house with him. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel the same feeling I had felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything, so as not to alarm my wife, but then the smell came wafting in on the breeze. She jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half-assed laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horrors that raged within my mind. She immediately caught on and asked me what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sounded just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out deep barks and growls in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks. And it's not an easy task. I'm 6 foot tall and 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back to the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running toward the house, In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer, till it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on as we made it into the fence of the yard, and I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end. At the end of where the light reached, wheeling around and tearing off back into the darkness. My wife looks at me and goes, "You want to tell me what the fuck that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's just go inside." I told her the story, and she listened intently, hanging on to every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers of the Appalachians, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain link fence was torn off of its posts. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed the creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, and burnt some herbs and led us back into the property. When we got into the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark. Not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who's lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least that was my thought when we first moved to the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately though, it didn't take us long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or the other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having not thought about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in our rather large yard that borders a small patch of woods. Well, last night, I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he could not get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulders, I heard him begin to bark. Only the bark was not coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep rumbling growl, a noise I've never really heard him make. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulders back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The two other dogs must have caught wind of what was happening and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, locked, and again loaded my firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped my floodlights on, the backside of my house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out of the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark ever again in my life. Not until this thing is gone. Originally, I'm from West Virginia. I moved around between the Appalachian and the Midwest some as a kid. Between the ages of 10 to 13, I lived in rural Kentucky in the foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. I lived with my dad and my grams. We lived in kind of like a cul-de-sac in between a set of foothills. We lived in the middle of the neighborhood with nothing but my family on both sides. No one lived across from us or behind us because of the foothills. When I moved in, my grandma had some rules I had to follow. At the time, I chalked them up to hillbilly stranger danger. They were saying like don't mess around with the wild animals, don't go out into the woods alone, and then they got a little weird. If you hear your name, don't answer it and don't go to it. And if you see someone in the woods you might know, no you didn't, just come home. This experience happened in August when I was 11. My dad and I had mowed a path through the tall grass and berry bushes to the left of the double wide we lived in. We camped out there a lot because it was close enough that we could check on my grandma. Now when you're in the woods, things are louder than you think. You have animal life, bugs chattering, wind through the trees and grass. There was a stream that ran along the road you could easily hear. That night we added the campfire to that list. My dad decided to go back up to the house about a quarter mile to get more beer and to check on Grandma. Before he left, he told me to not mess with the fire. After a few minutes of watching the fire, things started to get quiet, like real quiet. The wind had all but stopped, bug and animal sounds were all gone, and the stream sounded like it was miles away. I was getting uncomfortable, even though I've been left at the campground before like this. Then I started to smell and taste it. It was in the back of my throat out of nowhere. This awful metal tang. After a few more moments of dread, my dad came back. He was mad right away. Said he could smell burning metal coming up the trail. He accused me of tossing beer cans in the fire. I told him I didn't, and even pointed to the fire to prove it. He said there was a storm coming in and we needed to get back home, and he let it go. We left the tent and started our way back. Now, the very cool but very weird thing about lightning in the woods this dense is when the lightning lights up everything like the middle of the day, well up into the front of the trees. After the first set of trees, it's pitch black. There are no street lights, and unless you have lights on your property, it's completely black. So it's pitch black, lightly raining, and other than dim lights from the house windows, there's nothing. I'm eating watermelon as one does in August in the mountains when the first clap of lightning hits. Everything is as bright as it can be. After the second passes, it's pitch black. Next clap of lightning comes, and that's when I kind of see it. On the porch, past the yard, over the stream, past the road, and the ditches on either side, just past the first line of trees. I could see the silhouette of it. Then it goes dark. This is also when I can start to taste the same awful burning metal. I'm not really sure what I saw, so I kind of just stay still. It's a few moments before the lightning hits again. The figure is now closer, standing side by side to the trees. I'm standing now, not sure what to do. Not wanting to see it again or get any closer, I run inside. My grandma is doing dishes and ask why I'm inside. I tell her I think I saw something. She almost immediately gets my dad on his feet, telling him to shut and lock all the windows and doors. My dad, vaguely drunk, obeys. That night I sleep with her, and the next day we discover the tent door is torn off. It didn't look like an animal. Things weren't cut or shredded, but it looked like someone took and pulled it apart. My uncle, who lived a mile or so up, had all 8 chickens killed, heads gone, but no blood. The next few weeks, all the kids had to wait for the bus with an adult. My dad had to be late for work for almost 3 weeks. Anytime I tried to talk about it, I just had the subject changed. I just figured I was a kid and it wasn't important or real, but it wasn't until years later I finally understood. I was in my early 20s and some cousins were in town for Halloween. As I was telling this story, my aunt got irate with me, saying, "Don't you tell them that. Don't you put that evil on them." After I couldn't help but think back on all the times I tried to talk about it and how I was shunned. My kid mind not realizing it wasn't as simple as a subject change, but then actively shushing me. Once I started dipping my toes in Reddit, I realized there was a name for this thing. The same name my auntie had called it that day at the party, and other people have seen it. The Goat Men. What bothers me the most is how to this day I couldn't describe any feature, nor have I ever tasted that awful burning metal taste. So friends, if you ever find yourself in the foothills of Kentucky, please remember my grandma's rules. I once had a close friend who was an avid hiker. We will call her Annie for the sake of keeping her identity safe. She spent most of her free time hiking trails in and around the Appalachian region, Tennessee and North Carolina. No matter what the time of year was, she would always be out hiking. One summer, she decided to spend a few weeks hiking the Appalachian Trail. She wasn't going to do the full thing. She just intended to start at the beginning in Springer Mountain, Georgia, and finish up at the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. I was all for it and encouraged her to do it. I even helped her prepare, and we even arranged for me to meet her where the trail crossed through the Newfound Gap area in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I was going to bring her new supplies and hike for a few days with her along the trail while she was in the park, close by to where I lived at the time. The time came for her to begin her journey, and I drove her to the trailhead, dropping her off and left behind a very excited and determined Annie. During the first few weeks of her journey, I received several postcards from her as she would stop in and pick up her pre-arranged packages containing re-ups of food and supplies. She would write as often as she could to assure me that she was safe and making good time. Eventually, July rolled around, and it was getting close to when I was going to meet her. Before she left, we had sat down and figured out about when she would be reaching the backcountry shelter we were set to meet at. July 10th was the day we settled on. She was supposed to send me a postcard from the last re-up spot before when we were set to meet. And true to all of her previous cards, I received one detailing that she felt great, that she was on schedule to meet me at the Mount LeConte shelter on July 7th. I had received the card on July 2nd. We were going to stay at the lodge for the evening and have dinner and rest up before continuing the trail. Mount LeConte Lodge was one of the more popular destinations in the park, and you had to make the reservation months in advance in order to have a shelter for one night. It was important that we stayed true to our schedule, and Annie knew this very well. I gathered up all of the supplies we would need and had my then boyfriend drive me to the trailhead. He was going to hike with me to the shelter and leave once I had met up with Annie. We had a great time hiking there, enjoying the breathtaking views of the Smokies, while panting and sweating our way up the steep climbs. Eventually, we made it to the shelter, and I fully expected Annie to be there waiting for us. It was mid-afternoon, and we had been running an hour or two behind schedule. We went to the front desk to see if she had made it and checked in, only to find out that she had not arrived yet. We didn't think much of it because you can't be completely sure when someone is going to arrive with this kind of stuff, so we took our gear and settled in our bunker. We went up to the lodge and had some coffee and leisurely enjoyed our books and the views while waiting for Annie to arrive. Sunset came and she still hadn't shown up. This is when I began to get worried. My boyfriend and I walked over to the office and asked if anyone named Annie had tried to check in, and to our dismay, no one had. We went back to our shelter and my boyfriend tried to calm me down as my anxiety began to take over. She's probably running behind schedule. The trails in this area of the park reach the highest elevations of the entire Appalachian. She probably got worn out and fell behind track, he assured me. If she doesn't get here tonight, she'll probably make it by tomorrow. Don't worry. I tried to let his words soothe my worries as we lay down for rest, but I endured a long sleepless night. She didn't show up the next day. We waited at the office for hours, but she never came. Around 2 in the afternoon, we decided to hike down the trail towards the direction she was due to be coming from. We told the lady at the office to tell Annie we would be back if she arrived while we were gone. We made it back to the lodge around 5 p.m. and found out she had not been there. From this point, things got hectic. I won't go into much detail with it, but we had no choice but to leave the lodge and return home, leaving contact information with the people at the lodge to let us know if she ever arrived. Days passed and no sign of her arose. Anxiety and guilt and fear ate me alive in the days following. We had notified the police and mass search parties were sent out. Rangers, the police, and volunteers scoured the area between where she was last seen and where she was supposed to arrive. It wasn't until almost a week and a half later that they found her, bruised and starving, hiding in a ravine about 30 miles away from the Appalachian Trail and the shelter she last stayed at. Just over a day later, I was finally allowed to see her at the hospital. She didn't tell the police anything about what happened. She hadn't even spoken at all. Matter of fact, it took her a few years to tell me what had fully happened to her, including the details that she wouldn't tell the police. The experience had made her quit hiking altogether. I'm not sure if she would like me sharing this with you guys, but I want people to be aware that this exists and is something you should look out for when hiking. The Smokies most likely aren't the only place where this can happen. I will tell you exactly as I remember, in her words, the best I can. I left the shelter at around 8 in the morning on June 31st, and I hiked most of the day, making really good time. I was resting and eating some snacks to give me the last boost of energy I needed to make it to my campsite for the night. It was late in the afternoon, and that's when I first heard it. The sounds of men's voices came from a pretty good distance away, but I figured it was just some guys walking the trail, nothing out of the ordinary. I sat there for another 15 minutes, but nobody ever walked by. The voices would come in and out. It was weird. But at this point, I had been hiking alone for a few weeks, so I assumed I was just making up things in my head, because I was lacking regular human contact. I grabbed my things and continued on my way, reaching my campsite just as the sun disappeared and light was waning. I set up my tent and strung my belongings up on the wire cables to keep them from bears and animals if they decided to wander over. I was relaxing in my sleeping bag, reading a book when I heard it again. Voices. Louder now than before. I could faintly make out heavy Appalachian accents. Though it was still difficult to make out their conversation, I waited for the sound of leaves crunching or twigs cracking to indicate hikers joining my sight, but the sound never came. I shut my eyes and willed myself to sleep. You're just hearing things, I told myself. The next morning greeted me with the soft sounds of birds chirping and a soft breeze humming through the trees and against my tent. I went outside and, to my dismay, found some wrappers of my freeze-dried blood scattered across the ground. They looked as if they had been torn into, and all the food was gone. It was only a couple of packs, so I still had a decent supply. I guess the squirrels had found a way into my backpack. The only strange part about it was that my backpack was zipped shut and didn't show any signs of any nibbling or scratches an animal would have left. I packed up my campsite uneasily, trying not to think about the coincidence of the voices I heard the night before. I walked faster this day, trying to keep a quicker pace with the hopes that I would leave the weird voices and strange happenings behind me. I had been hiking for a few hours, passing a very minimal amount of people. When I heard the voices again, they didn't go away this time. They always seemed to stay at a steady pace behind me, and no matter how many times I looked over my shoulder, I could never find anyone. I came upon my next campsite and made the split decision to hike through the night. If these people who had been following me were dangerous, I didn't want to set up camp and leave myself in a vulnerable position to be attacked. I walked slowly through the night, using my flashlight as a guide. The voices had stopped a couple of hours ago, and I was beginning to feel like I had lost them, whoever they were. I came to a small opening in the trail and decided I would rest for a few hours, because my feet felt like they were on fire from all the walking I had done. I hadn't even taken the tent from my backpack when I heard the voices, this time directly behind me. There she is. A deep voice rung through my ears, and I spun around, pointing my flashlight in the eyes of two men who were ragged, dirty, and unshaven. The look in their eyes was sinister, and I will never forget the way my skin crawled beneath their gaze. I screamed and took off running in the direction I had come from. I could hear their bare feet running along the trail behind me as I ran. When I was far enough away and over a hill, I cut off the trail and sprinted as fast as I could through the brush and trees. It was breaking dawn at this point, so I was able to maneuver easier than if it were still pitch black out. For the next 2 weeks, I hid in the woods, dodging their looming voices and hiding in bushes. They were never far off. Sometimes I would see them wandering around and talking about the things they wanted to do to me. They looked as if they hadn't bathed in months, and they both only wore torn-up cargo shorts. Their hair was long and their bodies were covered in mud. I knew I wouldn't have anyone looking for me for at least another week, because no one was expecting me until July 7th. I barely fended for myself, struggling to find water and to ration my food accordingly. I knew if they found me, they would do bad things to me. I felt it in their eyes. I felt it when I looked at their clenched fists and heard their raspy voices. Eventually, a park ranger and a group of volunteers found me. A few weeks after being home and out of the hospital, I did some research and found out there were people who would hide in the mountains to escape the law, living there in order to avoid jail for the crimes they had committed. There were people who had murdered and violated people in many ways, in ways that would have warranted life in jail or even death. They are called the Wild Men. After hearing her story, I haven't gone hiking much. They can't possibly be the only ones out there. If you go hiking deep in the mountains, be sure to watch your back, because the Wild Men are always lurking. To start this off, I need to give some context. I'm 23 and I currently live in New York City, but I have grandparents who live middle of nowhere in West Virginia. When I say that, I mean the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors are over an hour away in a small town with a few houses and a Walmart. Last summer, my grandfather, who I'll just call Robert for privacy reasons, had surgery done to his hip. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast, and my grandmother, who I'll just refer to as Muriel, is very old and wouldn't have been able to take care of Robert. Because I was the closest family member, I was the one they asked to come down there and help out with my grandfather. Being the good grandson I am, I agreed to come down there for 2 weeks while he recovered from his surgery. But fast forward a week, everything was going fine. All I really had to do was help my grandfather up and down the stairs and walk his dog, a blue heeler named Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky once in the morning and once at night through the woods, behind their property. But because of his surgery, that responsibility fell onto me. This was the part that I hated about helping him, because ever since a kid, I never liked those woods behind the property. Whenever I'd go down there as a kid, me and my cousins would always get creeped out going into that forest. It always just felt off for some reason. Anyways, for the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if a bit creepy. That was until one night, a week into my stay, I was walking him through the forest. It was around 8:30 and the sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything was going normal until I heard a strange whistle that sounded like it was only around 20 yards away. Both me and the dog stopped dead in our tracks and looked towards the direction the whistling came from. I shined my flashlight in the direction, but I didn't see anything, so I just assumed it was a bird. Looking back, it definitely wasn't a bird. There's no nocturnal birds that chirp and whistle out there, and it sounded more musical than anything a bird could whistle. But the dog was spooked. He wouldn't stop growling and staring at whatever was back there, and he kept trying to back up until whatever or whoever this thing was whistled again. To which the dog started barking and going crazy. At this point, I decided that I definitely didn't want to stay there, so I yanked on the dog's leash, and we both bolted out of the woods and went straight back home. When we got back, and I told my grandparents what happened, they both seemed spooked, and my grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I told her that I didn't, and she seemed relieved, but told me that I didn't hear anything and to just ignore it. I asked why, and she wouldn't tell me, and would instead tell me I didn't hear anything. I decided not to press it any further, and I went to bed, terrified and wondering what she seemed so freaked out about. The next morning, she told me that instead of walking Rocky through the woods, I could just take him on a few laps around the house, so that's what I started doing. Every night I would take Rocky for around 50 laps around the house before going back inside. On Friday, the third to the last day I would be there, at night, I was walking the dog again for laps, as usual, until I heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage, which was only around 10 yards from the house. This time, I immediately took the dog back inside and locked the doors. The rest of the night, I put in my earbuds and I ignored any more whistling like my grandmother told me to. To this day, I still don't know what was whistling in those woods. Some of my friends said it was a skinwalker, but that's not really a thing around here. My girlfriend, who stayed back in New York City, asked her Muslim parents who are from Yemen, and they said whistling at night is a sign that a jinn is nearby. I don't know what that was, but whatever it was had my parents legitimately scared. I've heard of weird shit happening in Appalachia, but this is the first time I've ever had a first-hand experience with it. Does anyone have any idea what this could have been? If you ever end up in the mountains after sundown, be careful, be respectful, and most importantly, don't touch the skulls. The first time someone told me that, I thought they were strange, superstitious folk. I just moved to a little town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, looking for a new start away from the busy cities I lived in for all of my life. A house with forest for a backyard and neighbors a mile or so away sounded perfect at the time. It's what led me to buying the property in the first place. Don't get me wrong, the house is nice. It has a few problems though, like a creaking porch and the kitchen is a bit too small for my liking, but it's cute. Quaint is what the realtor kept saying when she showed me the rooms, and I agreed with her. Even if it is a little small, the real selling point was the acres of forest that would be considered mine. I remember my first trip to the town at the base of the mountain, a small place where everyone knows each other. Naturally, some weren't sure about me, but most were actually nice. Asking where I grew up, what I did for work, normal questions, until the owner of the only grocery store in town, Mr. Faraday, asked me if I planned on hiking in the forest. Well, yes, of course. I think I laughed as he bagged up my groceries, eyeing me the entire time. Of course, silly question, he agreed, as he handed me the bags and then continued. The forest is perfectly safe during the day. Just get home once the sun starts setting. You're asking for trouble with the wildlife, or you'll get lost if it gets too dark. Anything in particular I should worry about? I mean, we get black bears sometimes. All you have to do is yell at them though, and they'll run usually. Scaredy cats. The lot of them, unless you find a mama. Moose, foxes, wild boars, and even wolves. I paused in gathering up my bags and repeated, "Wolves? I thought wolves were extinct here in the Appalachians." Mr. Faraday shrugged and ignored my question, continuing like I hadn't said anything. Be careful out there. Always take water. Be respectful. Don't be one of them city folk that make a mess of the place. See a flower and think it's pretty. You take a picture and leave it alone. Easy enough? Anything else I should do? I wanted to be nice and not just blow the guy off, even if most of his advice was common sense. Then again, I didn't doubt that there had been trouble in the past with some outsiders. It happened all the time in the parks I would go to as a kid. jerks that would come through and leave beer cans or cigarette butts everywhere. He met my eyes, staring for a second too soon, before he replied, "If you see skulls or bones, don't touch them. If they are in the way, you go around them." I stared back, feeling uneasy as he suddenly smiled and said, "You come back soon, you hear? I run specials every week on fresh produce and meat." I should have listened better to him. The first few times I ventured into the forest, it was always in the late morning. There's an old trail behind the house, overgrown but still usable. There are all kinds of songbirds and small animals and interesting plant life to see. I tried going in the morning when it wasn't too hot. I also made sure to bring water and wore good hiking boots whenever I had time for a walk before work. There is a point in the trail where it branches off into two directions, and that is the point where I turned back around. The last thing I wanted was to choose the wrong path and end up hopelessly lost or unable to find my way back. Then work changed my schedule, so I started going in the late afternoon. I stayed out longer, just getting done with my hike as the sky was bathed in pinks and oranges. The sun no longer visible, but giving just enough light. I never noticed anything different between the morning and late afternoon hikes, other than less birds singing. Then small things began to happen, little oddities that were easy to write off. Trees that had long scratches down their trunks, or the songbirds quieting down at the start of my afternoon hikes, rather than towards the end. I figured it was from the seasons changing, the nights getting longer and days shortening. I had to be quick about my daily routine, only letting myself get maybe a mile into the forest before turning around. Even if I didn't believe the townsfolk that had gotten more vocal about being mindful of myself in the woods, I still didn't want to get lost. Then I came across a deer skull. It was in the middle of the path back to my house, bleached and cracked, looking far too old. I looked around the trees to see if anyone was around because I hadn't been there on my way up the mountain. I even called out, a nervous, "Hello?" and got nothing. The idea of leaving it where I constantly treaded made me sick, so I grabbed a stick and carefully put it through one of the eye sockets. I took a breath, then tossed it off into the trees, watching as it hit the ground before dropping the stick and quickly making my way back home. That's when the howling started. It woke me up in the dead of night. A long, lone howl off in the distance. I was confused, startled, because until that point, I had never heard a wolf howl before that wasn't on TV. I didn't even know if that's what it was. I laid there for a while, listening to it, then turned on some music to drown it out and go back to sleep. For a week, I would wake up in a cold sweat, and the wolf would be singing away until I finally started going to sleep with music. I asked about it the next time I went into town, curious if anyone else had heard it, but nobody did. Mr. Faraday shook his head and said he hadn't heard any noise as he gave me change for my groceries. The pharmacist told me it was probably just a lonely or hurt animal when I was looking for some sleep aid. Even the waitress at the diner shrugged and said, "Haven't heard a thing, honey. Just make sure to keep your doors locked. Always better to be safe than sorry." The next time I went into the forest, I made sure it was right after work so I could enjoy a nice long stroll. The trees with the scratches were closer to my home, but I shrugged it off, figuring it was a bear or a moose. I did my usual circuit, followed the trail until I got to where it branches off and took a minor break, sitting on a fallen tree to drink some water. As I got up to start my way down, I noticed that the forest had become quiet. I felt nervous, glancing around to look for a reason, like a bear stalking about, but found nothing. At that point, I quickly headed back home and nearly tripped over another skull. A moose skull, going off the huge antlers still attached to the white bone, perfectly preserved and staring in my direction. I looked around, wanting to find who was messing with me, but I couldn't see anything but trees and lush ferns. I thought about picking it up and throwing it to the side, but I took a breath and walked around it, then began running back home. It appeared 2 more times before I had enough. On the 3rd time, I picked it up and threw it into the trees. I didn't stay to watch where it landed, and the moment I got home, I slammed the door and locked up everything. I was shaking, trembling in my kitchen after locking the back door and dared to look out the window. I didn't see anything, but I felt like something was watching me. A howl didn't wake me up that night, no. The sound of my porch creaking did. The groaning of wood had my eyes snapping open as my heart leapt into my throat. I laid in bed, unable to move, when I heard a low growl near my window. The curtain was so drawn, I couldn't see outside, but I could hear whatever it was. The sound was that of an animal. Something didn't quite sound right. I tried putting my finger on it when the growling stopped for a second, Then a howl rattled my windows and my bones. I rushed to my bathroom, the only place in the house that had no windows, and slammed the door shut, curling up in the bathtub. I didn't move until my alarm rang at 7 and the sun was shining through the curtains. It kept happening. Every night, the porch would creak, the growling would begin, then finally the howls that lasted until the sun came up. I had enough by the 4th or 5th night and drove back to town, functioning on a cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and caffeine. I had to wait for the store to open, but the moment it did, I sought out Mr. Faraday, who was stocking some items on the shelves. He glanced at me, then said, "You look like shit. If you need help sleeping, you should see the doctor." Something keeps showing up at my house. I think it's that wolf I was telling you about. He froze, a slight tremor in his fingers before he turned, calling, "Sarah, mind the front, I'll be back." He didn't wait for a reply and instead headed to the back of the store, motioning for me to come along. I did, following him through a door that led outside. Once out on the too sunny morning, he lit a cigarette, then sighed. "I told you to mind the bones." I broke down at that point, lack of sleep leaving me without a filter. It kept showing up. I ignored it the first time and it kept getting in my way. What was it? A moose skull. There was another skull 2 weeks ago. It was a deer, but I moved that with a stick. A shake of the head. Still counts, son. What happened after you moved the deer? I admitted that's when the howling first started, but it was far off in the distance, easy to ignore. Something that had him frowning, but not interrupting until I finally asked. "It's not a wolf, is it?" Mr. Faraday looked at me for a long time, then stubbed out the cigarette before reaching for another one. "I told you what not to do, and yet you did it. Now you've got a mess to deal with." I opened my mouth, so ready to demand he answer my question, but he kept going. "Now listen here, and you listen. You're going to buy some meat, the reddest, bloodiest meat I have, then go home and put them in the fridge. When the sun is setting, you're going to go in that forest with the meat and put it on the path. The minute you do that, you turn tail and run home. You don't look back. No matter what sounds you hear or feelings you get, you run and lock up tight. And it'll just go away." "Just like that?" I asked, feeling a tiny bit hopeful. The next words dashed those hopes away. "Nothing is guaranteed, son. This is you trying to make amends. It doesn't mean you'll be forgiven." Anger boiled in me, and I snapped at him. "I didn't even do anything." He shook his head with a small frown and said, "You show disrespect and acknowledge them. That's enough in a place like this." I opened my mouth, but he brushed past me and asked, "You gonna buy the meat or what?" I ended up doing so. I didn't know what else to do and figured why not just go along with it. I couldn't explain anything else, so why not try to make amends? I bought the bloodiest steaks I could find and drove back home in a daze. I set an alarm to ring just before sundown and crashed on my porch until then. It was surreal, walking out to the trail as the sun began its descent. I noticed that more and more trees had the strange scratches on them and shuddered at the idea of something, or many somethings, being so close to the house. I walked about 10 minutes up the path before laying out the steaks. It was disgusting, the blood collecting on the brown butcher paper, but I piled them up, then looked around. I couldn't see anything, just the usual trees, and decided to head back home. I took a handful of steps when I heard it. A low growling from behind me that had the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Heavy thumping followed the growling, getting closer and closer, breaking me out of my stupor. I got my feet moving again and headed back to the house as the sound of teeth ripping into raw meat met my ears. Once I was at the end of the path, my home in sight, I dared to turn my head before I ran back to the house, scrambling up the porch and barely slamming the door shut in time. It had been right behind me, following like an obedient dog. Only it wasn't a dog, not even a wolf. I had to brace myself against the door as it slammed into the wood, growling and grunting. I managed to lock it just barely before rushing to the front door to make sure I locked it as well. It nearly beat me. I hit the door just as it started to open and pushed my entire body weight against it. It seemed like it was barely enough to keep it out as I flicked the lock. I stumbled back, shaking and panting, staring at the door as the growling began all over again. This time, I followed it to the back porch and peered through the window. It walked on 4 legs, fingers sprayed out with long claws for nails and covered in black fur in some places, pale human skin in others. As it walked, the back legs bent unnaturally and make a horrific snapping noise. the bones visible through the skin and twisting with every movement. The head is the most disturbing, a bloodied muscle that stretches out too much for a wolf, eyes glowing red, and can open the mouth far too wide. The fangs are all black and red with blood, too long, too curved. When it closes its jaws, blood oozes out. I stared at it, and it stared at me before the lips peeled back into a sort of demented smile. The growling stopped, and instead a new sound started. A sharp, high-pitched laugh, human almost, filled the air. I shivered, ready to shut the curtains when I heard more laughter. I looked beyond it, and froze at the sight of more pairs of red eyes out in the forest. The heckling grew in volume, echoing, until it's all I heard. Even now I still hear it. I hid in the bathroom again, feeling like a child and praying that my doors and windows would hold. Once the sun came up and I mustered up enough courage to get to my car, I found dozens and dozens of skulls on my porch, all different shapes and sizes, some bleached white, others black with decay, and some even red, and others laying in pools of blood. One of them was human. I wanted to run to the car, bulldoze through the bones, but instead I forced myself to carefully step over each and every one of them. Once I got back into town, I sought out Mr. Faraday. He listened quietly to my account, looking disappointed and annoyed by the time I was done, and said, "I told you not to look. Now you really made a mess, not just for you, but for everyone." My blood ran cold, and I asked, "What do you mean?" "Everybody heard them last night, son, 'cause of your fuck-up." He closed his eyes, then lit a cigarette, even though we stood in the paper goods aisle. "What if I just leave? Just go back where I came from?" He shook his head and flicked the ashes onto the ground, uncaring of where they ended up. "Then what? What do I do?" "You're going to clean up your own mess. A hunting party is gathering at the diner at sundown. You better be there." I asked if he really thought they could be killed, if it was possible, and he waved his hand and said, "We've done it before. You're not the first person to not listen. You won't be the last, but you made the trouble. You better be ready to help get rid of it." I swallowed, hesitating, then dared to ask, "Do people not come back from this hunting?" "All the time. This time won't be any different. Sundown, son. Or we'll not just be hunting them, but you too." We are gathered at the diner, and I've been given a shotgun and a crash course on how to use it, shown how to load it, and told what not to do and what to watch out for. According to Mr. Faraday, who was around for the last purge, the wolves of the Appalachians is what they call them. He's sticking close to me. He says having a buddy nearby is important. It's safer this way. The wolves like to drag people into the forest or decapitate their victims. They collect the skulls. The bullets I have are supposed to be special, blessed by the priest and bathed in holy water or something like that. I've never hunted before. That's why I'm leaving this account in case I don't come back. Hunting accidents happen all the time. That's what the townsfolk will say if anyone comes asking about me, or anyone that doesn't come back. The sun hasn't set yet, giving us time to prepare, and the priest time to bless every bullet he can. But we can hear them already. The wolves are laughing again.